just needs to happen now. But obviously, justice system doesn't do anything fast, and people getting off when we kind of think maybe that should have been the case. Or, like various high profile trials where it's been a not guilty verdict, but they've acknowledged the victim has gone away crying and bleeding and sore and in pain and traumatized. And it's like, is that who you want to be? So it doesn't have to be a legal thing. It should be a moral thing. So I think, that self-reflection is really important.
But I think the issue as well is that we're not taught how to have sex. It's an important part of life, and generally people like doing it. How can young people understand that actually that's not what they do if they're boys, and that's not what to accept if they're girls, and then between gay people too? So what's the answer, Caroline? Give it to me.
I have the answer.
Dr. Caroline West, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to sit down with you and have a good, deep and meaningful conversation about all things sex, intimacy and everything that comes up in this conversation, because I know there's going to be an awful lot to unpack.
Definitely. This is why I love my job, because sex, you don't know when you start talking what's going to happen at the end of it. There's just so much out there in the wonderful world of sex.
Yeah, there is. And can you tell me, first of all, what you do for a living? Because it's quite extensive.
Yeah, I can't remember last time I had one singular job. I have multiple jobs. So my official job is I am the Sexual Violence and Harassment Prevention and Response Manager at UCC. So I'm not here in that particular capacity today. I'm here in a personal capacity. So I'm also the sex and relationship expert for Bumble Ireland and the UK, and I have a sex advice column in the Irish Independent. And I'm hopefully going to be an author if my book gets published this year, which I'll hopefully do. And then I feel like I do more things, but I'm forgetting. But I'm usually to be found writing about sex or commenting on it, or news talk. Ring me up.
And I learnt about you because I invited you to the Viva La Vulva show to speak at it. And that's why we're here today. But do you do an awful lot of that corporate speaking at all? Or
I used to do more. When I did my PhD on the experiences of porn performers, and then so became the porn person.
So your PhD was in what? Excuse me?
I get that a lot. So the experiences of porn performers in the US.
Okay.
So I literally became the go-to person when any kind of porn related things came up in the media. It was like porn. So some days I'd do 10 radio interviews all about the wonderful world of porn.
How does one even decide to do a PhD in that? So I think we need to backpedal a little bit. Yeah. What were your first degrees in, or degree and postgrad?
So I did social science when I was way back when, and then I did a HDip in psychoanalysis, which is all about sex. Freud was like, you like this? That's about sex. You like that? That's about sex.
Was Freud a bit of a pervert?
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of projection about his own issues and things like this. And then he'd see one patient and be like, oh, everyone has this problem then. And you're like, that's not kind of how it goes. And then I did a master's in sexuality studies because I was like, I really like talking about this and how exploring how weird we are about talking about sex and why we're saying this is the correct way and everyone else is weird and perverted. But I noticed that we spoke about sex work, and the only sex workers that we talked about in the whole course were either really, really famous porn stars or everyone else that was trafficked. And I was like, surely there's more in between those kind of two. And then I looked at, let's actually talk to the women. So a lot of the research on porn doesn't talk to the people who are involved in it. They just make assumptions. So they're like, they must have been abused or they must have been this.
That is the assumption, actually. So and I would probably be guilty of that too. I would have thought that someone who's doing porn or someone that is working as a sex worker must have been abused at some point, because this is her way of controlling her body. And I do say her there. I know there's males involved, but usually we project it. Yeah, females, don't we?
We do, yeah, and all my work is on females as well. So, but there's absolutely there's a whole spectrum out there. But if you look at hairdressers, you'll find people who've been abused, or data entry clerks, or people work in a shop. They've had an experience of abuse. So it's not necessarily that porn performers are this weird abnormality kind of thing. They probably have the same rights as the rest of us, which it's kind of sad and depressing at the same time as well.
Because the rates are high, aren't they?
The rates are high, yeah. And it's like, you know, in Ireland, we haven't had a porn industry, but we've had loads of childhood sexual abuse in states and state care and the church care and in homes. So, you know, so you can't automatically say, oh, if you're an abuse victim, you're going to end up in sex work. So you might be a hairdresser or a teacher or, you know, whichever it is. So, yeah, so it's complex. And I'm really interested in getting past those kind of assumptions and, you know, oh, they must be this or they must be that. And, you know, the women I spoke to were complete hustlers. They had like, some of them had PhDs and they were hustling away and, you know, making their money and playing the system and then planning to, you know, go off and do something else afterwards. One of them made porn just with her husband, and that was, I met her one time and she looks like a tiny librarian. She had like this little cardigan on and was like so sweet and so quiet, and we were at this dinner thing at some conference in LA, and I was like, oh, what do you do? And she's like, oh, I make fart porn. And I was like, sorry,
fart porn.
What? Fart porn. And I was like, please tell me everything over dinner. And so, yeah, so she farts in the bath and farts on her husband, and that's how she makes a living. So,
and people like this.
Loads of people like it, yeah. So she kind of, that became her niche for a long time. So that paid her bills, because there's so many people out there into the weirdest stuff, and I use weird in a non-judgmental way, weird and wonderful. And yeah, they'll find it and really kind of drill down into it.
How does someone fart on demand? Sorry.
So this is, one of the techniques. And actually, I've had to tell this to my husband because he's diabetic and he's been eating diabetic sweets, which makes you fart on command. So I came home the other day and he had 2 packets of diabetic sweets, and I was like, throw them in the bin. Like, I'm not putting up with you going to sleep tonight after eating them.
Blowing a hole in the mattress.
Oh, God. I was like, you're bad enough as it is. Like, but yeah, so she takes those and kind of preps. And then some people are really specific about it, and they're like, you have to fart in the bath, but you can't make any noise. I don't know how you'd fart in a bath without making noise.
So they want just the bubbles to rise and to see that.
Yeah.
And then, and what other things do they want to like?
So they would say you have to wear jeans, or you can't make noise, but you have to describe it. And others are like, no, you have to make noise. So what I love is like, first of all, someone has to admit that to themselves, which is hard because it's kind of an odd thing. And then they have to act on it. And then they have to decide, yeah, no, this is my thing. I'm going to go buy some porn, or I'm going to try it out myself. And then for some reason, a lot of them tell other people about it. So they're always in documentaries. And, you know, it's always like the woman who married the Berlin Wall and all these kind of things. And I'm just fascinated because would you not worry about like the social stigma of that? And apparently they don't. So it's as soon as you think you've heard it all in the world of sex, you absolutely haven't.
And sorry, we did discuss before we started recording the Lunar. Is it Lunar?
The Lunars, yeah. Oh, I love them. I love them so much because it's just such a niche. Like, yeah, so these are people who are sexually attracted to balloons, and they make balloons a lovely part of their sex life. So, but they're so niche about it again. So some are like, you know, I'm really interested in the knot that you tie, or others are like, it has to be this shape, or some of them will put the balloons inside themselves, and some are like, it has to pop, and others are like, no, it cannot pop.
And are these men and women?
Mostly men.
Okay.
Men are mostly the ones that kind of have more fetishes than women.
And would these be mostly gay men that like balloons?
No, a bit of absolutely everyone. So there's always some kind of, there's usually a childhood thing, you know, like Freud was very much like, people have fetishes for high heels and stockings and fur, because if you imagine a baby looking on the ground, they'd see their mother and wearing high heels and stockings. And
because that's what we do all day, don't we?
Yeah.
When our babies are crawling around the floor.
Just like fully in like 6-inch stilettos. Like, but and the fur would be the pubic hair. But Freud has been problematic for many reasons and stuff. But
was he a psychiatrist?
He was a psychoanalyst.
Okay.
So he kind of pioneered it. He's good for some things because he said maybe we should listen to people. And that's a good thing to help people. But then he discovered actually that there was really high rates of child sex abuse and in his patients. And he was like, oh, that's why they're all coming to me. But when he said that at like some kind of medical convention thing, a lot of people were like, that's not true. So they couldn't accept that upper class people were sexually abusing their daughters. So he had to backtrack it and say, no, they're all making it up. It's all just like fantasies that they have. And because the backlash was so bad. And now I think, you know, we've obviously heard what's going on in places like Ireland and churches and Magdalene laundries for a long time.
And it's not just daughters as well, it's sons
not
too.
Not just daughters as well, yeah. So it's such a complicated history. So I think when you're talking about sex, it's such a mix of sexual pleasure and sexual violence and everything in between. So it's a fun job to have because it's never ending. So that's kind of interesting. Like people sexualize the pandemic. They would write to sex workers who would custom make content and say, can you make some kind of COVID specific porn for me? And it's like, this is fascinating.
What, like wear a mask?
Wear masks and like, you know, you have to, if you're doing like an audio erotic story, it's like, God, I came in and I had to take off my mask and I had to wash the groceries and all this. And it's just, where there is an item that exists in the world, people will sexualize it in some way.
And is that because we're sexual beings then? Sex is important for our existence.
Absolutely, yeah. And also we probably have too much free time on our hands as well. And I think but people have like so much shame, so that if they do kind of lean towards the weird and wonderful side, they kind of keep that quiet, and then that leads to a whole other host of problems as well. But yeah, it's kind of, you scratch the surface and there's like a lot going on. Even in Ireland, you scratch the surface, there's swingers parties going on all the time in Ireland. And I remember one girl once, she was asking me about dogging. She's like, do you go dogging? And I was like, I have a Fiat Panda. Like, there's not much dogging going on in the back of that car. I can barely get my shopping.
So tell me what dogging is. Just explain to our listeners in case they don't know.
So dogging is when you're having sex in cars or kind of parking up and having sex kind of next to the car. So this is what I love. They have like a whole language. So if you have the window down, that means you can join in. But if the window is up, that means you can just look. Or if the door is open, then you can join in. Or if they flash the lights a certain amount of times, it means whatever it means. So I just love that people have that like little language to themselves. And also they're very brave because like the weather in Ireland,
I know.
Like it's too cold to be out dogging.
All of this kind of thing, are these things that have really come on board since, say, the social media and phones? Like, would it have been much more difficult to find other people that had fetishes about balloons, pre-smartphones?
I think so, yeah. But it's also, like, when did smartphones come in? Like 2008 or 9 or something back in the day. But if you look at the social changes, like, you know, the church stopped having as much power. I mean, the last Magdalene Laundry closed in 1996. So we had Spice Girls singing about girl power while Magdalene Laundries were still in existence. But also, like, we've opened up as a country as well, you know, and that church and state doesn't have that much power anymore. Like, so, you know, it wasn't just women who were pregnant who got sent to the laundries. It was women who had sex outside marriage.
Wasn't it women that were too attractive as well? Or women that
they would sin. So not they had sin, they would sin. So, yeah. And sometimes, like, if they had a really pretty face, that would be targeted by nuns and all this just horrendous stuff that's kind of happened. So, we have kind of moved into more of a permissive society, which is great, because before it was like, as a woman, your only option was like get married and have a rake of kids, and that was your lot, and you better not complain about it. So, so we've moved on to balloons and pandemic porn out of that.
Oh my God, it is unreal. I'd love to talk to you about the sexual violence part of your work.
Yeah.
Because it does seem to be such a prevalent thing.
Yeah.
And by sexual violence, does that mean is all sexual abuse sexual violence?
Yeah, so the language is important here, because we used to understand sexual violence as just rape, which is legally defined as like penetration with a penis or some kind of item manipulated by somebody. So, you know, people would think then, well, that didn't happen to me, but something else happened, or, you know, they touched me or something, but it's not serious because it wasn't penetration. So that's why we talk about sexual violence as a spectrum, as in there's loads, like sharing nudes without consent is sexual violence. So it's important that people realize that. So, because if you can name your experiences, then you can get support for that and maybe start a legal process if that's what you want to do. So I think, that sexual violence is just, it's so huge and it's so prevalent. We are getting a lot better. But, you know, there are recent statistics from the Galway Rape Crisis Centre that said, you know, 20% of men would keep going having sex even if they knew their partner wasn't enjoying it, which is problematic on about 5 million different levels. Or they would say things like, you know, a no isn't really a no. People say no when they really want to say yes. But you can kind of see that in so much. Like, do you remember The Notebook? What's his name? Is it Ryan Gosling?
Yeah.
In that? And that's like a big rom-com, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
like this famous film. But there's a scene in it where he's hanging off a Ferris wheel or something. And he's saying, if you don't go out with me, I'm going to drop off this. And so she has no choice really unless saying no. And so if you're looking at that, that's like coercion. And like she obviously didn't want to go on a date. But her no is not listened to. And he's like, oh, she just needs a bit of, you know, massaging basically and like bullying basically to say yes.
But is that seen almost as like the whole like, oh, I'm trying to woo the woman as well, and like she really wants it, but like she's just holding back because she's so pure and all this kind of like there's a lot of bullshit there that's been like that we've learned over the years that it's socially ingrained in us as well. It's almost like if and you know even young girls, like if you say if you admit to loving sex and you know wanting to enjoy it, you're a slut, whereas boys are cool.
They're legends, you know, and it goes back into that. So a lot of girls and women are afraid to say yes because then it's like, well, screw you. Like even on dating apps now, if someone sends a compliment to a woman and it's like, oh, you look great, and she says thank you, they immediately go like, who do you think you are? Like, why are you so full of yourself? And you know, so you're meant to go, oh, sorry, like thanks, you know, and they expect that kind of not submissiveness, but it's this weird game that we have to play that we're not allowed to be like positive towards ourselves. Like even when I was growing up, like to be accused of loving yourself was such an insult. It's oh, she loves herself.
She loves herself. She's loads of confidence, doesn't she? Like where, you know.
And you would look down on that person and be like, stay her, like for doing that. And really a lot of that was just insecurity from people who wanted to be like that, but then just couldn't. So so we've just such a messed up history, like when it comes to even how do we talk about sex and how do we
and like the whole history of sexual violence or rape or molestation, you know, the way we hear so much of it nowadays, and obviously it's good that people come out and they talk about it, but because there's so much of it in the news or we do hear about it, is it something that's endemic in humans to want to abuse another human in a sexual way?
Yeah, it's definitely extremely widespread and it's not new. It goes back a long, long, long time. I mean, the ages of consent in some places are like 9 in many places, and child marriage, it's still legal in some parts of the States. And the age of consent in Ireland around the 18ish, 19th century was like 13. So they weren't seen as children as such. They were seen as like, well, they're in puberty, like they're good to go kind of thing. But also, you know, lots of people would have tried to leave their families and, you know, join nunneries because they were stuck at home with an abusive parent. So that was their escape route out of it. Or they'd, you know, emigrate. And like you look at the high rates of suicide we've had in Ireland, and you kind of think, was there some kind of relation there as well, especially for men, because it's harder for them to talk about this. And because even now, if you see, you know, headlines, you know, take the Daily Mail, it's like, oh, a woman teacher had sex with pupil age 15. And it's like, she didn't have sex, she raped him. But legally you can't say that because a woman legally cannot be considered a rapist. She can get charged with sexual assault because there isn't that penetration involved. So there's all this kind of legal jargon that's very different to a moral approach. But and then like guys who will come forward and say that, they'll get accused of like, well, why didn't you like it? That's like, oh, getting to have sex with your teacher, that's such a cool thing, and what's her number, and oh, if you don't like her, I'll give her a go. And you know, and it's like, that's not okay. Like that's really bad for male victims, and that means they keep quieter because the thing is, like, men are always, the viewpoint is like men are always programmed for sex, and it's like you have to be up for sex at all times, and if you don't, there's something weird about you. So it's a mishmash of everything. But yeah, it's global. Been done sometimes for religious reasons or for cultural reasons, or just hushed up. Like, you know, we knew this was going on in Irish society, even around like the times of the famine. If the mother died or had to go out and try and find food, the oldest daughter was the surrogate wife then, you know, and there were cases where the men were brought to court and they were like not not seeing what the issue was. They were like, this is my rights as a husband and she's basically my stand-in wife now. So like, what's the problem?
Jesus.
And these would be like teenage children. So,
and was this something that was common in
common enough
times?
Yeah. Even like domestic violence in the 19th century, there'd be weekly and sometimes daily newspaper articles about it. But a lot of the time the women were in such a position that like they wouldn't pursue it in court, because if the man got locked up, she would have no financial income and support. So they kind of had not a lot of choices really back then. So, and you can kind of see that now still in some cases as well. So, yeah, you kind of think we've moved on, but we kind of haven't in a lot of times.
Yeah, and that's something that I want to ask, because, you know, was the whole, you know, we've heard of incest in families as well, and, you know, the Catholic Church did oppress our sexuality for an awful long time. So it wasn't okay to go and explore yourselves the way teenagers would normally want to. You know, you never heard about masturbation. You never heard about anything. You know, sex was shameful. So in some ways, maybe that suppression of natural urges then led to the fact that people might become abusive in that way. But is it abuse in that way? You know, what is the term for it? If you hear now as well, and I don't want to trip myself up because I don't want to say something that offends anyone, but they say now that children are sexually abusing other children. So say you have a young teenage boy, 13, 14, might abuse a girl, 11, 10.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes it's such an area you have to tread delicately on, because children do explore, and that's completely normal. And you know, kids play doctors and nurses and everything like that. That's fine. But then if you have people bringing power dynamics and coercion, and it's not an equal, innocent exploration, that's kind of a problem. And I think people think, well, you know, it's obviously porn is the issue, but they're not just watching porn. Like, they're not locked in their room watching porn 24/7. They're growing up in their family home. So what dynamics are in the family? They're watching TV. If you watch like Love Island, you know, there's always someone who's abusive on there, but we just see it as like, oh, that's drama, you know. Or you'll see Hollywood films, or, you know, there's so many influences that are kind of out there that really kind of go into that person. So if they're 13, 14, bringing power and control and coercion into it, that's extremely worrying. And you kind of think, what else was going on in that situation for that kid? So there's a lot, and thankfully there are programs in Ireland. Like if anyone is in that situation with their young person, they need to worry about it. Like, there are programs to support people, and you know, so if young people get caught sharing nudes of each other, that's really problematic, because if they're under 18, then that's like highly illegal, and it's images of child sexual abuse, basically, even if it's sent consensually.
And if there's two people sending them consensually, is it and one's male, one's female?
Yeah.
Is it usually the male that's considered the problem? Because is it considered that they're more...
Not usually, no. I think in that sense, like, and there are a lot of girls sending nudes without consent, a lot. And, you know, I know...
As in sending nudes that someone else has sent on to them without consent. Okay.
Forwarding on, and they'll send it of other women as well, so, and other girls as well. So it's kind of like they see it kind of as bullying sometimes rather than sexual violence, you know. So that's kind of a new conversation we're having. You know, like we used to say revenge porn, and that kind of didn't really do it justice, because it's not shared for revenge sometimes it's shared for a laugh or something else, and it's not porn. Porn's filmed by professional adults who consent to being in that world. So the correct term is image-based sexual abuse, because it's using images to abuse somebody, and it'll cause harm to them, because who wants your nudes, you know, kind of out there and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot. Like, I think, you know, it's great that we're having these conversations, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's new. It maybe means we're more aware of it and we're more ready to hear it. And I think, you know, the dam really broke again, going back to the Catholic Church. Like, you know, when survivors started speaking up, they were ridiculed and they were called liars, and they were just, you know, dismissed. And then finally it got to the point where we couldn't ignore it anymore. And then
Sinead O'Connor was wiped out after, you know, tearing up the picture of the Pope, and that
probably cost her millions,
and her career for a long time too, because
and her mental health, and she was exactly right, but we couldn't say it at the time. So maybe we did have more children abusing children back in the day, but we just didn't want to talk about it, or, services didn't get involved, or you got locked up in some kind of institution and it wasn't talked about then.
Yeah.
So we're better now about talking about it. So sometimes it might seem like there's more, but we didn't measure it before.
And actually, that's what I wanted to ask you. Is there the same amount of it going on as there was years ago, or is there more of it because of porn, or is there, does anyone have statistics on how much sexual violence there is out there?
Yeah.
Because a lot of it goes unreported, am I right?
It goes unreported, yeah. And again, like if you look at some simple statistics, you could make the claim that, as porn came into Ireland, the rates of sexual assault went up. And it's too simplistic, because the rates of sexual assault went up because we started listening to victims and who started reporting it. So we finally had statistics kind of going. Like if you look at Sweden, they have like really in-depth, detailed laws. So you might think, God, Sweden has a really high rate of sexual violence, but it's not. It's just because they have better laws that kind of capture it. Because there's one guy who wrote some research paper, and it was like everywhere that porn was up, then sexual assault was down. So he was as simplistic as saying porn up, rape down. And it's like, that's not the case, because it's so underreported, and no one, again, just watches porn. So it's really kind of complex, and there's lots of different social factors and health factors and all those kind of things in it. So the answer kind of is like, we're not sure. Is it more that more victims are coming forward because it's a better environment for them? Or is more actually going on? I mean, what did you do with a 7-year-old who was abusive back in 1960s Ireland? Like, what, did you lock them up in an industrial school or something like that? Or, and maybe their records aren't kind of counted, as part of it.
But even general sexual abuse, is there more of it or less of it now? Do you know?
I think it's hard to kind of say that, because again, those kind of stats and things, and we're more aware of it, I think, and more open to it. But like, there's something going on, and if there's one case, that's one case too many, so I look at it that way rather than trying to pin down numbers as such. Sometimes it's like, what's the human cost of this? And it's far too many people becoming victims. And I think that's really, really kind of where it's at. So like, obviously it would be fantastic to have zero, but it's, where do we go? So, because it's so underreported, like, I mean, travellers have a really hard time accessing the justice system. Disabled people, it might be their carer who is the abuser, so they can't report, because who's going to look after them? Children might not know where they can go to, or different minority groups. If you are like a migrant sex worker, are you going to report an assault to the guards when you could be at risk of being deported? All those kind of things. So it's not really a simple, easy answer, because we need to take all those nuances into consideration. So, and, the justice system as well, if you went by convictions, it's so hard to get a case to court, and it's so traumatizing for victims going forward. So they're not really accurate either. And then even if you do get to court, you're still experiencing things like victim blaming. Why'd you go home with him? What were you wearing?
That's the whole thing. It's like
awful.
That still goes on. I can't, like, how can people be a prosecuting barrister in those situations? I just don't. Or is it the defence barrister? It's the defence barrister, isn't it? He's defending. The defence barrister is defending the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And trying to make the victim out to be someone that was just asking for it.
Well, do you remember the case in Cork when the barrister held up a black lace thong, and this was only something like 2016 or 18. I've lost all track of time since the pandemic. It's all one blur. But they held up their knickers in court of this. I think she was only something maybe 17, 18, and he was in his 20s. And she said, well, she went out wearing these knickers. So, maybe she was asking for it. And it caused outrage. And like, people, Ruth Coppinger held up a pair of knickers in the Dáil, and she's like, does this mean I'm asking for it? And actually, Irish women and a lot of Irish men shut down the country and had protests. There was people out on O'Connell Street, and they were like, this is not okay. Yeah. So we're more aware of it because of social media as well. Because if we didn't have social media and the use of Twitter, that protest might not have happened because that victim might have just been able to go home or and not have anyone to speak to. But because we can use a hashtag to mobilize everyone, we're more aware of it then. But yeah, like using what kind of knickers you're wearing. And this is like just a few years ago.
But it's still very difficult for people. Like they still are traumatized coming forward in the first instance and then going through it. Going through the blaming as well. So a lot of people just don't report it, do they?
No, it's a lot. And like thankfully we have support services like rape crisis centres who are open to all genders as well. I think that's important to say, that can support you through that process if that's what you want. But yeah, the whole system needs to be burnt down and start from scratch again, because it's just not massively fit for purpose. Like cases take too long to get to court, or you know, you can have your counselling notes used against you in court as well.
How is that allowed?
No, I don't. Like, what other crime can you use that for? And it's just. Yeah.
So if I go to counselling because I was raped by someone,
your notes.
My notes are allowed to be used, even if I went to a private counsellor and.
Yeah.
Sure, that would put anyone off.
Exactly.
Even going to a counsellor.
Exactly, because you're trying to make sense of it. And it's really hard to say the term "I was raped." It's really hard to say that. Lots of people go to their grave and they'll never be able to say that word, even though, you know, like to say you're a victim, because no one wants to be a victim, you know. Like I used to work in refuges with women experiencing domestic violence, and they'd all be like, how am I here? How did I end up in a refuge? Because no one envisions that in their lives. And it's really hard to say, I'm a victim, you know, and then even to move on to feeling like a survivor is the right term, you know. So it's really kind of complex. So for people to come forward, it's difficult, you know, but there is support, you know, and there's always support there, and you can go to like Women's Aid and Men's Aid as well. And, you know, and even if someone shares your nudes, you know, there's a great service called hotline.ie, and you can report your nudes being shared without your consent on there. So we are getting better, and there's lots more awareness of, say, for example, using your counselling notes against you. So there are pushes to reform it, but it just needs to happen now. But obviously, justice system doesn't do anything fast, I think. So, and people, you know, getting off when, you know, we kind of think maybe that should have been the case. Or, you know, like various high profile trials where, you know, the victim, it's been a not guilty verdict, but they acknowledge the victim has gone away crying and bleeding and sore and in pain and traumatized. And it's like, is that who you want to be? So even if you're not legally convicted of something like that, is that how you should be leaving the people that you're having sex with? You know, the people that you have sex with should be coming away going, that was deadly, I might do it again, even like that was brilliant, or it was all right, I don't know if I'll bother again. You know, but not coming away physically or mentally damaged by the experience. And, you know, so it doesn't have to be a legal thing. It just should be a moral thing of like, how do you leave your sex partners in such a bad state like that? So what kind of person does that make you then? So I think, that self-reflection is really important.
But I think the issue as well is that we're not taught how to have sex.
Yes.
You know, and it's an important part of life, and generally people like doing it. But it's something that you suppose you have to learn. And if people are watching porn and expecting to just lob it in there and thrash away the way they do, how can young people understand that actually that's not what they do if they're boys, and that's not what to accept if they're girls, and then with all the other sex that goes on in between gay people too. So, you know, what's the answer, Caroline? Give it to me.
The answer, I have the answer.
Okay.
Good sex education is the answer. And that is not wheeling a TV in and showing porn to kids. Like, so people think that's what porn literacy means. Porn literacy, all that means is like understanding what you're seeing on screen isn't real. Because kids understand that the Fast and Furious isn't real because we talk about it and we're like, that's not how you learn to drive, right? You're not on the M50 in your Fiat Panda going like 300 miles an hour or something. You know, we know that's kind of weird, but because they're watching porn in secret and in silence and in shame and stigma, they kind of think, well, this must be it because no one else has said anything different to me. And historically, Irish sex education has been woeful and missing everything that we need to know. So we know from research, like the UN has carried out research, and everywhere where there is like really decent, really comprehensive sex ed that includes like consent and contraception and bodily autonomy, that the rates of first sexual encounter go up the ages, sorry. So instead of, maybe they would have had sex at 13, but now they'll have it at 18, which is great. So some people think if you give kids sex ed, they'll all rush out and want to try it.
Yeah.
And research from multiple countries has said, no, they actually wait. They're like, oh, I learned about that now. I don't want to do it yet, so I'll wait till later. And they're more likely to understand consent. They're more likely to understand contraception. And they're also more likely to know what a healthy relationship is. So some people would focus on, the red flags of relationships and all those horrible things, domestic violence and assault and all those things. But we don't talk about, what is a healthy relationship? And like for me, I struggled with this because, I used to look at all the Pinterest things about, if you break up and he fights for you and, if you have this roller coaster relationship, it means there's so much passion, and don't give me a calm relationship. Give me a wild, sexy relationship.
Give me a walk in the forest any day.
Yeah, it's a lot less stressful. But that's what I thought romance was. And especially you see this on TV and Hollywood films, and, there's always some kind of drama. And for me, I was like, oh, that's normal. So then when I did find myself in abusive relationships, I was like, this is kind of this. It's just what you do. It's, there is all this kind of stuff going on. And I didn't have the language for it because I also only understood domestic violence in terms of physical violence, when really there's so much more, emotional abuse, coercive control, financial abuse, all those kind of things. So if you learn about the healthy relationships and learn that, in a nice, healthy relationship, it is just a walk in the park, but you feel calm and supported, and you're not on eggshells and kind of going, when's the next fight coming? Or, I better not say this because it'll cause a fight. And, so we need to have that part of things as well, not just the horrendous stuff. We need that kind of too. And people really respond to it. They want to know, they want to know. And queer people have been left out of our sex education in Ireland for all its years, so it's very much focused on when a man loves a woman and they get married and then they put the penis inside and then they have a baby. And it's that leaves out quite a lot of things. It leaves out queer people, but also leaves out sex for pleasure, not just for reproduction. Yeah. And most 16-year-olds are not trying to get pregnant, so they kind of need to know the rest of, the sex education. So, so good sex education is the key. And it doesn't mean having to get graphic or anything like that. And there's loads of resources out there that you can give to your child.
When you're talking about sex education, it's not just the SPHE program in school. It's the education that you're giving your children at home.
Or in the car. Actually, there's a great sex educator called Sarah Sproul. And
she's great. I had her here.
Oh.
She was in your chair.
Oh, I love Sarah. Yeah, she's one of my bridesmaids for my wedding. I love her. She's just brilliant.
I think we spoke for over 2 hours and she talked all about it, and it was great. And actually, I often refer people back to her podcast and they're like, how do I talk to my daughter about, sex? She's asked me at 7 and I don't know what to say. I'm like, listen to Sarah. You just tell her in a really basic manner. And kids do absorb it really well.
Totally. And she talks about, those minutes in the car and stuff like that.
That's so important.
So it's not just the talk, it's all the talk.
While you're having your dinner, while you're spooning the soup into your mouth, you're just talking about whatever else.
Or you happen to be watching, I don't know, Big Brother or something like that, and something comes on and you're like, oh, this can be a moment to kind of talk about it. Yeah. But people are awkward, but if you don't do it, you're leaving your kids at risk.
And you know what as well? It's it is a little bit embarrassing because you'll be talking to your kid and you're like, oh, but in actual fact, once you do it and they kind of see that, actually, this is just a totally normal conversation. And if you're really upfront with them and say, listen, I just want you to be safe and happy. And I think that they can see from you that it doesn't have to be this awkwardness, because
absolutely,
and it can be tough to start, but you know, once you kind of get into it, and I think if you have the language of every day, then, and what I always wanted was my kids to be able to come to me with an issue if they did, or if they were worried or embarrassed about something. So if you break down that embarrassment and make nothing embarrassing,
absolutely,
then they can ask you anything.
Much healthier. Like I didn't get sex education when I was growing up in school or at home. I think like my mum threw a book in my room one time and that was it. So the result of that was like not knowing what sex was, and I was just so incredibly vulnerable, and you know, it just left me into situations where I was traumatized and abused, and you know, maybe I not necessarily could have avoided it, but maybe I would have known that I could reach out for help, and maybe I could have known it was wrong in the first place because I thought that's just what you do, or, you know, maybe that's what sex is. And it's like, no. So I wish I had had that experience. So I always say to parents now of like, you know, you protect your kid by putting a helmet on them going on a bike ride. And so do you want to leave them out there in the big bad world on their own, trying to navigate that as children and young people? And it doesn't work. Like, it has to be really proactive. It has to be just an essential part of parenting, like food is, or like the bike helmet is. You know, it's just, you have those chats.
And do you think that we have to accept as parents that porn is a part of our children's lives now from probably a much younger age than we would have ever even come across it?
Yeah.
Like, you hear of kids, 11, 12, 13 accessing it, particularly if you have a phone or someone has a... And even like, I hear about, I have the parental controls on it.
No,
but it's like...
They're getting around that.
They can get around it. Plus, you can be guaranteed that there's one kid in the class that doesn't have the parental controls.
Or they'll send clips on like WhatsApp or something like that. Or they'll find it on YouTube, or they'll find it wherever, you know. And like, they know how to get like VPNs and watch like TV shows that they want to watch, you know. And so they'll do that with porn as well. So it's just, it's absolutely, it's like porn isn't going away. So it's like, how do we deal with it? And there is research from the University of Galway that says the age of kids first watching porn is 9.
Jesus Christ.
Like, can you imagine a 9-year-old watching God knows what, you know?
So if they watch that, and I can imagine the fear that they might have watching something like that, because I actually remember the first time I saw it. And I remember being shocked because I called into a friend's house, a girlfriend's house, and there was like some boys there that we used to that we hung around with as well. I think it might have been about, were we 14 or 15 or something like that, and they'd found her dad's VCR porn tape and put on. The lads were sitting there, and I remember walking in and going, and I was embarrassed and shocked, and I felt a little bit ashamed and dirty, and you know, I didn't go home and tell anyone that I'd seen that, but and I just think that if you're telling your child from a young age that, look, you know, if you see this or come across this, it's not actually the way adults have loving relationships. You're starting off from somewhere, because it can be very frightening. A 9-year-old, oh my God.
Yeah, and like a lot of porn is really violent and misogynistic. Loads of porn is great. I'm not anti-porn. You know, some porn is just like really awesome. But not for a 9-year-old on any level. But you know, a lot of the free stuff that they'll see on the tube sites like Pornhub and things like that, it is kind of violent and misogynistic. And there's no consent shown, because that all happens off screen. And then it's just like this mind reader stuff where the guy initiates everything, takes control, and also it's like really boring sex as well, because it's like, oh, she gives him a blowjob, and then he just picks her up and penetrates her without like anything.
And she's screaming with pleasure, and
and then it'll go from vaginal sex to anal sex, and then he'll usually come on her somewhere, and that's it. So do you want your kids to go, oh, that's what sex is, it's A plus B equals C, and I don't have to talk to her, I don't have to ask consent, anal's on the table every time, I don't have to learn what a clitoris is or understand pleasure is a two-way street? So do we want to throw our kids to the wolves around that, or do we want to be proactive and go, I'm awkward as hell, that's fine, you can be awkward, but you still have to do something. 9-year-olds and even younger. I used to pick up my nephews from school, and these kids had like iPhones, and they were probably like 7 or something. And I'm just going, that's quite
they've access
vulnerable.
To so much. And it can be so
yeah.
confusing too. So I think that it's so very important for them to us to be just having those conversations. Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
You can't, like,
the
they don't have the
responsibility of being a
skills.
parent these days is just horrendous.
That's what I made the decision to be child free, and I'm very, very glad about that, because it's terrifying.
I'd say there are so many people that are envious. No, it is, and it's like you feel this, you've this responsibility to, but then there's so many things going against you.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
It's tricky, and it's, you know, you're not alone. There's so many other people, and that's why people like Sarah are so great. And, you know, the sex ed curriculum in school is getting better. It is being reviewed, and we do have, you know, options to help people with that. Like, there is a program from Active Consent who, it's called Sex on Our Screens, and it's looking at, you know, kids looking at porn basically. And before they do the little module, you know, they kind of report that they've really poor body image because they're comparing themselves to porn performers who are like athletes. Like, that's their job. Like, they're nipped and tucked and everything else, and go to the gym a million hours a day because that's their job. But if you're, 12-year-old at home not having thousands of pounds in plastic surgery, you're going to compare yourself to them. But after doing the course, they kind of feel a bit better about themselves, and they understand a lot more that what they're seeing on screen is not real. So the more of that we can have, the better, because you don't want to seed all those anxieties and insecurities into people going, well, my penis doesn't look like this. And, even for guys, like, in porn, the penises are quite large a lot of the time, and they can be like anywhere from like 8 to 12 inches kind of long, which is like the size of your arm or something. Like, and we all know vaginas aren't that deep because otherwise they'd be up in your collarbone or something like that.
God.
And the average penis size in Ireland is about 5 inches. So you have people being so
when you say
insecure.
In Ireland, is it smaller and bigger in other countries?
It can be, yeah. So, but generally like 5 to 7 is kind of average kind of thing.
Okay. And listen, if you're smaller, it doesn't really matter either. So long as you know how to please whomever you're with.
Absolutely.
Is actually...
You just develop skills in other areas. And not everyone loves penetration either.
Actually, haven't we learnt that a lot of women do not orgasm or come with penetrative sex? It's usually all the other stuff that goes in between.
All the other stuff, And it's like some people are just... they might call themselves size queens and they're like, yes, I need like a massive penis. Not everyone's like that. Some of them are like, I'd actually rather just oral sex, or I'd rather fingers, or whatever it happens to be.
I just want to be kissed. Yeah, of course.
Like that. So if you think that like sex, if you think that being good at sex means, you have to have a giant penis and you have to be able to pound away for hours, then you are going to be crap in bed. That's actually, what it is.
Actually, the more women will run away from you than come towards you, because that's the last thing they want.
They'd be doing their Tesco shopping list in their head going, this has gone on for hours. Like,
and actually they'd be worried about walking around Tesco, because if they've been pounded for so long, they won't be able to.
Just riding a bike afterwards. They're like, no, it's not happening.
God.
So that doesn't work. And that's what I love about sex, that there's just so many things you can do. So it doesn't have to be A plus B equals C. It can be A plus X plus Z plus a few numbers, or whatever you're up to. Throw some balloons in, or...
Oh my goodness, the balloon thing, I'm still like... And what other... Actually, come on, let's talk about some other fetishes that you have come across.
My favourite one, my absolute favourite one is objectum sexuality. And this is where people fall in love with inanimate objects. So there's a woman who married the Eiffel Tower, and she got really jealous because another woman also married the Eiffel Tower, but they share. They have arrangements of who goes there and what day.
But
are
they a little bit mentally disturbed, these people?
There can be a link with autism, because again, maybe it's just a struggle with human interaction or something like that. Not all sex has to be with humans. Like, robots exist, and vibrators exist. So you're not having sex with a human if you're whacking out your magic wand or your womanizer or whatever. So there doesn't need to be another human present. So it's just kind of the spectrum of sexuality. They're not hurting anyone, and it kind of works for them. But I remember seeing this this documentary thing, and the guys were into cars, and they were like marrying their cars kind of thing. And 2 guys arranged to meet up and like show off their cars, and one guy was caught in the middle of the night going out and sneaking out and masturbating over the other guy's car. And I said, the camera crew must have been like, this is gold. This is like, they were like, get up out of bed. Like, we need to film this. And it turned into a fight and they had to leave. And it's just really fascinating how people figure that out, but also admit it to yourself, because that's really hard to be like, I actually am into this. But then they go and tell the world about it. And I'm like, what? Are you worried about people like, judging you or not getting a job or something? And you're going, I married a fairground carousel. That was one of them as well. And I'm just like, they're brave,
But who married them? Like, I don't even understand.
It's probably not legal marriage.
Okay.
But just that they've made that commitment to it. And I just love it. And like, the people who have like 20 sex dolls and stuff like this, and they all have their own names, and they buy clothes for them and stuff. And they're like, oh, this is Barbara. She doesn't like, Tracy. And then so they have those like personalities and stuff. And I'm like, fair play. Like
if they're not hurting anyone, then so what?
It's not hurting them. Yeah.
And actually, there was one thing that we talked about just before we came in as well, and you were saying about the fact that you deal with the sexual violence area of it and the trauma part of it, because you know, sometimes it's not just about just whack out your vibrator and you'll be grand if you can't have an orgasm. There's a deep level of trauma with some people if they've had sexual violence or been abused in the past, and how do they navigate their sexuality?
It's so hard. Like, and maybe then you know, marrying the Eiffel Tower might be a safe option. Then it's like a lot of people who write to serial killers on death row, like they're the ones in control. So that person is never getting out. They're never coming after them. They're never going to be able to hit them. You control. You don't have to write back to them if you don't want to. You know, so I think that's an interesting kind of way of like a safe relationship for that person, even though they're talking to a serial killer. So it's a really interesting kind of look at that through a trauma lens rather than like this woman's mad kind of lens. But there's so much trauma out there, and you know, maybe it's not safe to explore your desires in real life. You know, there's lots of places where it's illegal to be gay or to be trans. So what do you do then? You know, so maybe you do look at AI, or you do look at VR, or get a sex robot, or watch porn, or all those kind of things. Virtual reality.
Oh, right, okay.
So yeah, you can get the little goggles and kind of play out your fantasy that way, you know, and it feels kind of real. But I think, sexual trauma from childhood or previous relationships, it's so common and it has such an impact on people. It impacts how safe we feel around someone, how vulnerable we permit ourselves to be, how we communicate our desires. So to be able to stand, you know, to say, actually, that's not working for me, can we do something else? Or even to allow yourself to have pleasure, or to even get through the moment, you know, because you might think, oh, I'm grand, I'm healed again. And then you hop into bed with someone and then you just freeze because it's just too much, you know. So that's like nervous system overwhelming and things like that. And like you have to go to therapy, like a lot. Well, you don't have to, but like, because there's lots of different ways that we can heal. Like, therapy doesn't work for everyone, but you have to do some work to get things back on track. It's not going to magically solve itself. So people say time is a great healer, but it's time plus work is the great healer. So, you know, like I have probably spent thousands in therapy over the years, which has enabled me to reclaim my sexuality and reclaim my bodily autonomy and to be able to have a lovely sex life with my husband now, who's probably going to die when I say that. But, you know, it that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have said enough is enough. I need to kind of reach out and I need to get support.
And you were in abusive relationships yourself.
Yeah.
And did you grow up in an abusive environment?
Yeah,
yourself?
I did. So a lot of people who will end up in adult abusive relationships would have had experience of childhood traumas as well, because that's what you know. You know, people go to where they're familiar. And even working in the refuge, I saw people whose mothers had been in maybe 20 years ago and now they're coming in. So it's just a lot of, and you know, if maybe parents are traumatized themselves, there's lots of circles, you know, of like intergenerational violence and things like that.
It's important to say though as well that just because you were abused, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you will do that to your own children, or that you
absolutely
will
not,
be violent in any way. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to have abusive relationships yourself or always be a victim in those. You know, it's just, it all depends on lots and lots of different factors. But the key is kind of, you have to do that work. And that's why sometimes when we talk about sex education in such ways of like, just have an orgasm, it'll be fine. It doesn't work for a lot of people, because to just have an orgasm is a mammoth task that is just too scary. It's too vulnerable. It's too traumatizing. Or maybe you just don't know, like your sex life might be completely different after you've experienced trauma. So, you know, it's hard to unpack all those layers by yourself, especially when you have no sex education to kind of back it up. And that understanding that that sexual violence is so nuanced and so different, and it's not just penetration, it's lots of different things. And like people struggle with the idea of, oh, well, I said yes, but I didn't really want to, so therefore I'm at fault and it's my own fault. But sometimes if you kind of pick that apart, they think, well, I said yes because it wasn't a safe situation to say no. Or if I said no, he was going to do it anyway. Or if I said no, it would just cause a hassle and it's just easier to get it over and done with. So that's all sexual violence. But because people said yes, they can struggle with that. So it keeps victims kind of in the closet for longer, really, without reaching out for support. So, you know, it's understanding all those narratives and
it's
nuances.
the shame that a lot of survivors feel, isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Because actually, I got a message from a lady who had come to one of the Viva La Vulva shows, and it brought tears to my eyes. She messaged me and she said that she had come reluctantly to the show, but her friends had brought her, not knowing her story.
Right,
but her friends just said, "Oh, come on," and she had come reluctantly because she's been completely dissociated from her body since she was a child, because she was sexually abused as a child. And she says that the show, the talks that we did at the show, finally gave her the language that she would never have used before about her about her anatomy, right? She'd never been for a smear, never been to talk to anyone about that. And she said that that the show actually had allowed her to she didn't feel as much shame about herself, and didn't feel as guilty for it having happened, but she was a child when it happened. So the fact that she felt ashamed, and that is something that victims, no matter what age, they do carry with them, because they blame themselves for either being in the situation, for allowing it to happen, for not telling someone.
Absolutely.
And how do they get rid of that? It's a
process. Yeah, it's not going to happen instantly. We internalize all that victim blaming all the time. I mean, if a case comes out against a celebrity, remember, what's your man's name in Sex and the City, Mr. Big? He had some case against him where women finally spoke up when the new series had come out, and everyone on Twitter or X was like, "Why is she coming out now? It's just because she wants a paycheck now because he's coming back into it." And it's that lack of understanding that it takes a long time to kind of be able to put words to this experience. And maybe you don't want to have them do it to anyone else, or people who are, say, maybe if you're a sex worker and you're raped, people might say, "Oh, does that mean he just didn't pay?" So all those kind of little comments can build up over time. So if you're a victim and you're looking at this on social media and some of the backlash to Me Too, you kind of think that applies to me, and that's my friend saying that on their Facebook or something, or they're talking about rugby players doing stuff and they're like, "Oh, well, she shouldn't have been there in the first place." And if you feel I shouldn't have been there in the first place, you can internalize that and it stops people coming forward. Was it the singer Chrissy Hines or something like that? And she said she was raped by a biker gang, and she was like, "It's my own fault. I was there and I knew what was going on." And it's you could be stark naked, walk down O'Connell Street, 4 a.m, pissed out of your tree, falling over, and you are still not to blame. It's the person who chooses to commit violence on you that is to blame. End of. That's it. But we still have people going, "Well, what were you doing? Why are you doing that?" And it's you should be able to walk home naked if you want to. Whatever circumstances lead you to be walking home naked at 2 a.m. Hopefully it was a good night. But it's always that choice. So we have to do a lot of work in society to make people feel comfortable about that. Because if you think of domestic violence, the first questions is, why did she stay? The first question of someone hit me, I'd be out the door. It's not that easy.
It isn't.
But it shouldn't be that question. It should be, why does that person choose to hit someone else? Or why does that person choose to control someone else? So refocusing it back on the perpetrator
but that
is so important.
I know that, but that's very easy to say, right? Yeah. But then it's the victim is the one that's going to come forward because they want out of the situation, or they're the ones being hurt.
Yeah.
How do you get the victim? How do you get the perpetrator to want to get the counselling or the help that they need?
Yeah.
To not commit to that act. So they have to come forward, admit their mistake, and say that they want to help. So it's very tricky.
It's kind of hard, and I think we're at a really interesting point in Irish society. So I was talking to a counsellor in Galway, and they said they had a 19-year-old perpetrator come to them and say, I've done harm to someone. What can I do? And she said she really struggled with that because she deals with the victims all the time. And she was like, "Well, if I don't deal with this kid now, what's he going to be like when he's 50? Or, is there going to be a trail of harm to people behind?" So we kind of need to look at how we deal with victims. At the moment we think of cancel culture and stuff, which even though it doesn't work in reality, but if you hear someone's a rapist, you kind of think, "Oh, they're a monster." It's no, they're human. And they chose to do that. So if we just call them monsters, we think, oh, it's just them. They're abnormal. There's something wrong with them. But actually, it's your friend. It's your brother. It's your sister. It's your mother. It's your father. It's your work colleague. It's all these normal people on the surface. So reframing that and actually getting those supports in there for perpetrators might hopefully stop them going on to continue, cause more harm. But that's a new conversation that we're kind of having. It's because it's hard, it is difficult, and we demonize these people. But then what do they do? Do they
retreat back into themselves,
and they're going to be part of society. So what do we do with them? You can't cancel them and they just live on the dole and never leave the house anymore for the rest of their lives. They're going to be out there. So it's just, how do we do that? And there's obviously differences though between those who really enjoy committing sexual violence and those who do it more, maybe less intentionally or something, or maybe they haven't realized, sending nudes without consent is sexual violence. So there are differences in approaches, but it's really hard to have that conversation because it kind of sounds like you're minimizing it or you're excusing
and that's
them,
it, and you don't want to ever do that.
No, it's never acceptable regardless. But it's like, what do you do if you've harmed someone? Then what do you do, and what kind of person do you want to be going forward? So reaching out and getting that help. But I think, for victims, I mean, I think we're in a better society now to come forward, but we still don't have enough funding for the Rape Crisis Centre and things like this, and the kind of that understanding. So it needs to come back to us as people to be like, maybe I won't say that awful thing about a victim on Twitter, a celebrity victim or something, because so-and-so is going to see it, your friends are going to see it, and your friends statistically have been assaulted. Your family statistically have probably been assaulted as well. So the stuff that we say, if you're at the dinner table going, she just wants a paycheck or something, you're teaching that to your kids, or you're saying that at work, you're teaching that to other people, and you're carrying on that rape culture. And that's what rape culture is. It's like excusing the perpetrator and focusing on the victim and saying, well, what are they doing? What were they wearing? What were they drinking? All those kind of things, rather than consent culture is like, no, we're not going to take that. People have to face consequences, and we're going to put all this back on the perpetrator. So you can be that victim who's a hot mess at 3 a.m. and you don't know which way is up, and you should be perfectly safe, because it should be weird to take advantage of someone in that sense. But now it's like, if someone takes advantage of you like that, it's like, it's your own fault. Your own fault. You should have done it. So all those kind of victim blaming statements is what we can do to make an enormous change in how we deal with sexual violence and how victims recover as well. Because I had some of that. Like when stuff happened to me, I totally internalized it. Should have done this, should have done that. And you spend so long beating yourself up and saying should have. But really it's like, they should have done this. It's not about you, So I think being sensitive and thinking with compassion and empathy is really, it's really where it needs to be. And just in those little steps that we can all do. This isn't a problem that you can just farm off to the Rape Crisis Centre and be like, they'll deal with it, or the guards or the courts. It's like all of us and all our
the
statements.
whole of society. And then the way we talk to our children as well about everything too. And like what you said, just like not even making those comments in front of them.
But even like if you're talking about kids, if you make comments about, oh, you're not going out dressed like that, are you, with that tiny skirt on? You're kind of saying, what if something happened to them? And they came back and was like, I can't tell my mum about that because she was already giving out to me about how short my skirt was. And she won't tell you then, so she's kind of feeling like, well, it's my fault because my skirt was too short. So all those kind of things. So it's a fine line a lot of the time and stuff. Or if you're making racist comments, like the pyramid of sexual violence is held up by things like racism and classism and homophobia. And you might think, oh, well, in the States especially, there's a stereotype of black girls being fast is the word they use. So it's like they're sexually active and wanting to explore, and they're horny little teenagers because they're black girls and that's what they're like. And it's like, no, that's really, like, black women are really vulnerable to sexual violence, but it's normalized by saying it's their fault. So you've kind of stopped seeing them as human and started only seeing them as like, their race or their ethnicity or their disability or their gender, all those kind of things. So all those attitudes that stop us treating other people with respect, it's massive. So
Gosh.
overwhelming, but there are little things that you can do, you know, like those little comments and stuff, you know.
Can we talk a little bit about sex workers and Monty? Because I'm intrigued with Monty.
Yeah.
Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is my new book that's going to come out hopefully 17th of October if it all goes
Is
to
it
plan.
called Monty?
No, Monto.
Monto, sorry.
Yeah. So it's going to be called The Wrong Women Selling Sex in Monto because they were viewed as the wrong women. They weren't good, upstanding citizens.
I'm not sure who the fuck is a good upstanding
citizen. I know. We're all wrong women. And this was Ireland's biggest red light district from 1860 to 1925, just off O'Connell Street. And it was just bustling by all accounts at the time because you had the British soldiers, you had British Navy men, and you had the docks coming in, and you had people coming up from the country to go to like cattle fairs in Smithfield and stuff, and then they'd pop on down to Monto at the end of the day. But it was wild. It was very segregated by class. So you had high class brothels that were known as the flash houses, and that's where women were like finely dressed, you know, and there was like proper brothel entertainment. You could get your alcohol there at a very exaggerated price, of course. But you could sit there and spend your night there and then go upstairs with the girls. But then things kind of stratified down, so you can go into second class brothels and even a fourth class brothel, which is essentially a room you rented for a few hours, and if you were lucky it had a bed of straw in it, and if you were not lucky, bare rotten floorboards. That was it. Or then you were on the streets. And then, so, you know, your brothel was like a laneway, you know, that's kind of it. Which is normal for sex work all over the world before and after Monto. It's like, it's all stratified by class, and you'll have high class courtesans, you know, that'll deal with the Casanovas and the politicians. And then you'll have people who deal with the soldiers and people who deal with the regular punters as well. So, you know, and a big part of what I've looked at is like the outfits and the costumes, and some of the madams would ride around in their carriages with like rings on every finger, and they'd be like, oh, look how great I am. And
the madams were the ones that ran the show, yeah?
The madams ran the show, yeah, because a lot of the times they were former sex workers themselves. So they knew all the tricks of the trade, and were able to, you know...
Is that where this expression tricks of the trade comes from?
I don't.
Because the way turning tricks is
yeah. So maybe it is. I'm not sure.
That just came to me.
Yeah,
it must look that
up later.
There's a lot
of tricks. Yeah. Oh, but they had like talking about tricks in other red light districts. Now, see, of course, the thing is that obviously the women are long gone, and a lot of their history wasn't kept because they were dirty. You know, they weren't the right kind of women and stuff. But in red light districts across the world, there were people who'd have they'd have virgin rooms. So they'd have clients come in going, "I want a virgin," and they're like, "Yeah, we can do that," and they'd pay an actress to pretend she's a virgin. She'd be like, what's this, a penis? Oh my God.
This is so sore.
Yeah. It's like, And to, you know, obviously there's that myth about you'll bleed the first time you have sex.
Yeah.
It is a myth. But they would put things like sponges soaked in pig's blood into their vaginas so that they could be like, look, I am totally a virgin. And you might think, oh, that's really funny, but maybe it's also a survival technique, because what if he turned around and was like, hang on a second, there's no blood, you're not a virgin, and she's extremely vulnerable in that moment. But in Monto, they use pigs' intestines and they would put that inside their vaginas.
How do they not get all kinds of diseases doing
this
kind of thing?
That's what I was thinking.
They must have done. Oh my goodness. I can hear, right, I have a friend and she's an infectious disease consultant and specialises in gay men's health, and I can just hear her listening to this going, oh my God,
your vulva's just closing up for business. It's like, that's it. But they would do things like douche with vinegar and like Listerine, and was like a massive part. That's why Listerine got so popular as well, because it was just that disinfectant. And they've done brothel excavations in places like Boston and Australia, who are all kind of staffed by Irish women as well, and bottles and bottles of Listerine and douche equipment and stuff was there, and it was just for like flushing out all the stuff that was there,
like semen plus pig intestine plus anything else. Jesus Christ. And you said there was 1,500 women working in this area.
Yeah, at any one time, and it was only this kind of square kind of mile or kilometre, I forget which version of it is. I always get my measurements mixed up. So like you're thinking, but there are families mixed in as well. So one room could be a brothel and one room could be a family home with like a mum and dad and 15 kids in that one room, because that's, you know, that's what you had to do. You had to give your babies or have all your babies. So it was really kind of bustling and wild, and and then you'd have all the soldiers coming in, and then you'd have religious protesters coming in, and then people just there for gawk. So it's kind of like Amsterdam now. People go there with no intentions of buying sex, but just to sit there and like look at the atmosphere and see everyone kind of walking along, and like that was it. And Monto was a place where you could go get drink after hours, and sometimes people would bring a bottle of whiskey in and go to the brothel, and that would be their night. So it was amazing. But the madams made a lot of money because they'd rent the clothes out to the girls at like extortionate rates as well. So they found it hard to get out of it because they could never pay those rates off. It was just so one way to control them.
And if the girls misbehaved, what happened?
If the girls misbehaved, so the thing with the money was it was generally split 3 ways. So third to the woman, third to the madam, and a third to what they call bully boys. So they were kind of like their enforcers. So like if a girl had gone down a laneway with a guy, you'd probably have a bully boy at each end to make sure that not only was she okay, but also to count the men that she was with. So if she went back to the brothel and she was like, oh, I only saw 7 men, and they were like, actually it was 9. Good luck to her. So she could be stripped of all her clothing. She could have her face slashed with cutthroat razors. She could have, they were gang raped a lot of the time as a punishment. There's one story from a Monto resident who said, oh, I thought I was listening to cats, crying outside my window, but actually it was women being gang raped. And it's like, that's how close everything kind of was. And then they would be put out on the street. So if your face is all kind of busted up, it's harder for you to get business. So then you're more vulnerable. So then you'll take whoever you can get, at that stage. So then you're on the streets and you're really, really vulnerable because somebody who you don't know can come along and be like, I'll give you whatever, a few shillings. You're not really in a position to turn that down. So, it's really, really, really vulnerable.
Do you say women will come up during the famine? They will come up and to get work, to make money?
Yes. So Monto kind of rose up around 1860 and the famine was the 1840s-ish. But then you had the land war afterwards. So you'd have women who would have survived the workhouses, which were horrendous, and sex workers who used the workhouse were segregated from the other women because they were the wrong women and they'd corrupt the good women, and all this kind of mad stuff. And they'd like cut their hair sometimes as like a punishment thing. So they would like, again, trying to survive, after the famine, if they're able to survive it, because the people who went to workhouses were generally women and children, because the men would often die, in different ways or abandon their kids and stuff. So they'd come up to Dublin to try and survive, and then they'd be met off the trains in Connolly Station with someone going, oh, I can help you out. So kind of what you'd view as sex trafficking nowadays,
okay.
and so consensual, bringing them into Monto, and they're like, I'll get you a dress, I'll get you clothes, I'll get you a bed over your head, a roof over your head, and then you're in the sex trade before you know it. So, but then others came and they were like, I'm going to go into this for a couple of years, and they married their clients sometimes, and they went off and lived happily ever after.
That was few and far between, though.
No, a lot actually. Yeah, a lot of them would marry the soldiers and the sailors, but some of them would marry like multiple sailors, and they'd be like, oh, Johnny's back in, I have to like act like a wife with him for the next week, and then he's gone, and now Tom's coming in, so I'm Tom's wife now. And so the women had autonomy in like, wheeling and dealing and surviving and getting around things. And they robbed the men a lot of the time. So if you went into Monto as a man, you were being robbed and you couldn't say anything about it, because also the police were kind of in on it as well. So a lot of the police were clients in there, but also they would get protection money from the women as well. They were like, I can either arrest you or you can give me some of your earnings. So that police violence is obviously still in place in a lot of red light districts as well. So
is it?
Yeah, completely. Like there's lots of cases, like you name the country and it's like, oh, this serial killer turns out to be a cop who's targeting women coming over the border or something like this. Because women are really vulnerable, or they may, not have families that might notice that they're gone missing, things like that. So like a lot of Jack the Ripper targeted women who were not necessarily sex workers, but in the same kind of situation as them. The Yorkshire Ripper, again, it was all sex workers. People noticed that this guy was active, and then they were like, oh, they're just sex workers though. So they didn't take it seriously. So they had more freedom to go murder more women. So maybe if they had been taken seriously, multiple lives would have been saved.
And is it because sex workers are considered to be less than?
Yeah, there's still that objectification and, you know, like the language used going through, it's like in Monto they're called the poor unfortunates. So they're always kind of viewed with pity, but other times it's like harlot or whore or corrupter. So Victorian times it was kind of like good women were chaste and stayed in the home, but the women who sold sex were like viewed as corrupting and they were something to keep away from the good women. So they weren't seen as like being worthy of empathy and being worthy of kindness even, you know. So it's a pretty bad state of affairs, you know, for a lot of them. But the fact that it's forgotten about is, I think, really interesting because, like, you know...
Because I knew nothing about this now.
Yeah.
Nothing.
I'm a dub and I didn't know anything about it for ages. And I volunteered in one of the youth clubs that backs onto Monto in, like,
Is Monto still... Is there the name there at all anymore?
It's
is there
still kind of
it's not Montague Street, is it? Or
it's
sorry,
Montgomery Street.
Montgomery Street, that's it, okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the names have changed because people wanted to kind of reclaim it. It's like very gentrified. So the cobblestones are still there. So you can walk on the same cobblestones that all those sex workers walked on. And there's one house still left as well. And the remains of the laundry were left. So obviously...
As in the Magdalen
Laundry, yeah, a lot of them ended up in there. So, yeah, there's all that, and a lot of the history has just been kind of forgotten about because they were the wrong kind of women. But they're also women.
They're not nice stories, as in, like, you know, why?
Nice stories, yeah. And like loads of them, you know, they would sleep with the British soldiers. So during the fight for independence, people were like, oh, they're extra, like, you know, betraying us and not good Irish women because they're literally sleeping with the enemy. But then some of them would pass their little like pillow talk from the British soldiers over to the freedom fighters for independence. So they'd they played a role in the 1916 Rising, but it's not acknowledged. Like one madam would, if one of her girls got syphilis, she'd send her over to the Brits free of charge. So it's like biological warfare. And that was like, because it took them out. Like I think it was at World War I or II. World War I, maybe like something like 40% of British soldiers were off because they all had syphilis. So, you know, that kind of really impacted their war plans and stuff. So this madam was there using biological weapons to help Ireland get independence. So fair play to her, like.
And what happened to the ladies if they got pregnant? And how do they prevent pregnancy?
Yeah, if they got pregnant, a lot of the time they were kicked out of the brothel because they were commodities, you know, so that wasn't good for them anymore. Some of the families took in the babies. They became known as the Monto babies. So the families would just sometimes open the front door and there was a baby in a basket outside and they just took them in, gave them their surname. They're like, right, we have another mouth to feed. So that was really nice. Later on, they would often get locked up in the Magdalen laundries or they would emigrate because they knew, like, so the laundries were kind of really picking up pace now and, like, you know, how they were controlling people and the state was kind of happy to push these women into laundries and containment and stuff. And then they would go to mother and baby homes. But people knew how awful they were. So they wanted to help out, you know. And even when they left their babies there, they'd come back and visit them and give them like Christmas presents and things like that. But they're like, I've no money, I've no job, or, you know, so they couldn't take them back then. Or they had their own abortionists as well in there, you know. They'd go, like one doctor had like free rent in exchange for providing abortions for the women, or they would take things like herbs. So for hundreds of years, Irish women have had abortions because they take herbs or they fall down the stairs, you know, accidentally, or they take hot baths or loads of gin and all this kind of thing. Like women have been trying to control their fertility for a long time. And Monto was no different to that. And most red light districts had abortionists on hand, you know, for things. But yeah, if you didn't have access to that, life became very challenging. And also a lot of infanticide. Ireland has really high rates of infanticide because people were like, I just can't feed another mouth, like, you know, and not necessarily murdering the child, but dying by neglect. You know, they're like, oh, I just won't feed them. So because they couldn't cope or didn't want to have the child or whichever. So there's lots, and that wasn't
none
just
of
a
this
Monto thing.
is really talked about, is it?
It's mad, and it's just like we're only scratching the surface of like the women locked up in mother and baby homes, and even like last week or something, there was some scheme that announced compensation for those who had been in mother and baby homes, but loads of people were excluded.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Because they spent less than 6 months in it.
Oh my goodness. Like, I mean, it's just, again, like
so
trying to brush the bullshit under the carpet, and it's just awful. Like, it's, don't get me started on
like,
all that now.
Some women spent their entire lives in institutions, and it's just, they were fallen women and they were beaten and, they had their heads shaved and all those kind of things. And it's just, what we have done to women in this country is just, I wonder if we'll ever get to the bottom of all the things.
Probably not. And then you've got that intergenerational trauma that, say, a mother who was treated appallingly, how does she view herself in the world, and therefore how can she relate to her own children? Like, it's terrible. There's so many questions to be answered, and even just women's healthcare, like, we're still so behind, and we've taken great steps in the last couple of years, I suppose, but we're still, we need so much more education. Totally. Sex workers nowadays, what, like, we were talking about them as well before we came in, and you were saying, like, a lot of them, they're putting food on the table.
Yeah, that's, there was someone in, like, after Monto closed, 1930s or something, and this cop was out in the street and he said, "Oh, why are you out tonight? What are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, I need to get £7.50. He's like, "Oh, that's very specific. Why?" And she's like, "I need to buy a communion dress for my child." And like, that still goes on today. It's like things like communions and confirmations and Christmas. It's like, how do you find money for those things? Because they're expensive. Like, I think a communion can cost like $1,000 or something now, and it's all that kind of stuff. And like, that's, a lot of women are doing that, or they're doing it to feed drug addiction, things like that. So, but the way the law is at the moment is prostitution itself isn't technically illegal. Like, you can sell sex, but it's you can get charged for like soliciting. But if you are two sex workers together,
which mean you can sell sex, but you can get charged for soliciting.
Yeah, exactly. It's silly. Like, so yeah, you can. Like, you can get moved on the street if the guards think that you're touting for business, but it's not technically illegal to sell sex, but it's illegal to buy sex.
Okay.
So again, kind of unworkable.
But does anyone ever get prosecuted for buying sex?
Mostly the prosecutions under this law from 2017, it's been a handful of men for buying sex, but more women being done for being brothel keepers. So a brothel keeper is two women deciding to work together for safety, and they can get charged with brothel keeping. So if me and you got an apartment in town and we were like, we're going to sell sex, you stay in this room, keep an eye out, keep your phone on you. If something goes wrong, you can call someone. If we did that, we would get arrested and charged as brothel keepers.
Wow.
So there's been women who are, there's one woman who's pregnant, and she got arrested and she was given a custodial sentence. And you're going, what is that going to do for her? She's going to get out, and on her CV now it's going to be like, oh yeah, brothel keeper. How are you going to get a job after that? And like, what does jailing a pregnant woman do? Yeah. Like, it's just like, you're just traumatizing people over and over. And since the laws came in as well, the violent acts against sex workers have shot up something like, is it 93% or something? So really high.
Since the laws come in, they've shot up.
Yeah.
How come?
So because sex workers are more likely to work on their own then, because they don't want to get charged as brothel keepers, and violent people know that. They also know that they might have a lot of money on them. They might have drugs on them, and they're less likely to go to the police sometimes, because if they're here illegally or something like that.
Okay.
So there's an organisation called Ugly Mugs, and they track records of violence, and they put out, alerts. Oh, this guy's been seen in this area, be careful, and stuff like that. And they have said, it's something like 93% or 83%, something super high like that. I forget the actual statistic.
Jesus.
And like things like being threatened with axes and all this kind of stuff, like really intense violence. And a lot of the time, because that relationship with the guards is now so fractured, what they would have done beforehand was let the guards know, here, I think there's this woman, I think she might be trafficked, or I think she might, you need to help her out. But that's not there as much anymore, because that trust in the guards is totally broken down. And there is research, University of Limerick from maybe 2-3 years ago, and it's called something like Am and Die Somebody as well. And they found that like there's a lot of like police harassment and intimidation still going on now for sex workers. So that relationship is kind of lost. Whereas if you look at places like Amsterdam, they have such a good relationship with the cops, so that, you know, they'll go and get their STI checks, they go and pay their taxes. If something happens, they're backed up, they're supported. So it's, you know, it's different ways to approach it, but it's not all the same. It's not as easy going, oh, we'll just import Amsterdam over here, or, you know, and then there's models like in Australia, there's like legal brothels, and there's one woman who the guy refused to pay, and she took him to court, and the judge was like, no, she provided a service, you need to pay. So that's not going to happen here.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, they were on their side. And, you know, so if you want to help people out of poverty, it's kind of a, you know, that's a conversation to have. Like places like France, they were trying to ask women or, well, sex workers to exit the industry. And they were like, oh, yeah, we'll give you something like 200 a month or something. And you're like,
oh, yeah, great.
What? Who's going to live off that?
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of people do sex work not because they're like, yeah, let's have loads of sex with people. They're doing
or
it
let's
to
make let's like make loads of money. It's more like a survival thing.
Yeah, and like you might come home with like maybe a few £100 if it's a good night. You're not coming home with like millions, you know. And it's just, you know, people are really vulnerable when it comes to loss.
They're so vulnerable to so much as well, like to diseases, to pregnancy, to violence, like what you said.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much there. And even like what you say, they could be robbed as well.
Yeah,
Jesus,
absolutely.
You know, humans are just mental, aren't they?
Yeah, so that's like I try and leave the ideology behind of like, is it sex work or is it prostitution or is it right or wrong or is it feminist? I'm like, let's look at the humans involved in this and listen to them. They're the ones on the ground that we need to listen to, and some of those voices we'll never get to hear, like the people who are trafficked. You know, how do we help them, because they're so controlled and they're so isolated. So it's complex. So there is no one like, it's all sex work, everyone's happy and everything's great, and there is no, it's all trafficking and everything's terrible. It's all the things in between, you know. And the same with Monto, people use it to supplement wages, or they do it for a few months and then never do it again, or, you know, it's transitory, you know. It's just like, even in porn, the average time in the States a lot of times like 3 months, you know, and that's enough to make like maybe a few thousand or something. And not everyone goes on and has like a 10-year porn career, you know, all those kind of things. So if we kind of stop thinking of it in very black and white terms and start listening to the humans who do that job, I think that's really important. Like, because like for you, I can't speak what it's like to be a pharmacist. I could probably take a guess and like maybe say something vaguely intelligent about what it's like to be a pharmacist, but I'll never know. I'm not one, and you have an opinion and a lived experience that I will never have. This is the same with things like sex workers. So I can't ever tell everyone, yes, this is the reality of what it's like to be a pharmacist, because you'll be going, hang on, she's missing X, Y, Z, you know, all that kind of thing. And it's the same with anything. You know, it's the same with absolutely any way that we all survive to get money, and we're all exploited in lots of different ways in our jobs, you know, and we're all trying to put food on the table. So we live in this capitalist society where we can't live for free. So what do you do? You know, so it's complicated,
isn't it?
The answer for everything when it comes to sex and relationships and everything.
Can I ask you what you do for Bumble?
Yeah.
Like what do you do?
So less sexual violence stuff, thankfully. So it's really great, actually. It's speaking of, so Bumble is a woman first dating app. So women have to send the first message. So guys can't. But if you're two women on it, then you can talk to each other then. And you can also find friends on it as well. They have Bumble BFF, which is great. So it's just talking about the trends that we're seeing and helping people, you know, create good profiles or create, you know, decent attitudes.
Good profiles that aren't fake.
They aren't fake or full of like someone wearing sunglasses and a hat, you know.
Or a guy standing, you know, beside his boat, or, you know, holding a fish.
And all those like tiger pictures that were or like you have to figure out which one they are, because there's like 10
there
people.
There are 5 friends. I know, yeah.
Yeah, and you're just going, oh, and like, so it's like, how do you send decent messages rather than hey? Or send nudes, you know, which is like a thing now as well. So it's talking about that, and like I just really like the positive side of it, and like the empowerment side of like, it's okay to break the rules, and they carry out a lot of research on their users across the world and in Ireland, and they're like Gen Z, they're more into sober dating now. So I get to speak on those kind of trends in the media, which is great. So it's like they're going out and not getting hammered before dates, which is lovely, because I think we've all had the rose-coloured glasses on or rosé-coloured glasses on at like 2 a.m. We're like, that person's great. And the next morning you're like, Jesus, like, oh. And then they're texting you and you're like, oh, can I block this person? No. But yeah, so talking about that positive kind of take control, you can ask for a day. Because before, years back in Ireland, it would be like, oh, you're desperate. If a woman was to want to ask a guy out, it's like, what's wrong with her?
Yeah.
Why is it? That's the man's job. So I really like that we're finally throwing that in the history bin. And like, Gen Z again, they're like talking about finances.
Can you tell people what Gen Z is, just in case they don't know?
Yeah. So Gen Zs are born kind of millennial, like 2000 upwards kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
all the 20-somethings.
20-somethings, yeah. Now.
Okay.
So millennials are kind of, we're all now in our 30s and 40s kind of thing. So we're less cool. Buzzword now. Yeah, we're less cool. I can speak personally and say, yeah, we're less cool.
Definitely less cool. So we were just discussing going shopping into Zara and saying, sorry, is any of this shit relatable to me or not?
And I'm like, no. I can't get into any of this stuff. Like,
or like, it's just like, it just feels like tight or like too revealing.
I'm going, where would you be going wearing
this?
I
know, you're definitely not going down the local to wearing that.
Yeah, like, Jesus, no.
So Gen Zs are dating without having as much booze on board.
Yeah.
Okay. So and actually I've heard they're having less sex.
They're having less sex, and that's global as well. Or
is that because they're getting all the sex they need from their phones and porn, or they can't relate to each other? What is it?
A bit of both. So first of all, they have nowhere to have sex because the housing crisis.
But in Italy, right, I was in an Italian restaurant last night, a guy from Sicily, and he said in Italy, up until they get married, which can sometimes be in their 30s and 40s because they live with mama, they have sex in the car.
Yeah.
In their little Fiat Punto or whatever. Can you imagine that?
That's just...
So...
Yeah. No, I have a Fiat 500 and I'm like, nothing's happening in
that. Like,
it's just...
Yeah.
That's madness.
Awkward.
But
But they're not... So they've nowhere to go.
They've nowhere to go. And, they're kind of... There is that global trend as well of like less alcohol consumption as well. So they're not having
That's a fantastic sex. Global trend, isn't it?
It is, because, a lot of the time it was leading to sex maybe that they kind of regretted afterwards. And And like, maybe if they're sober, that wouldn't have happened, So there's less sex that's just for the sake of it.
Okay.
And they're like, I'll actually wait till it works for me, because they're being a bit more conscious. They're like, oh, I don't have to go along with this just because everyone else is doing it. So sex in a pub toilet, it might work for you. It might be the hottest thing in the world. Or it might be like, no, I really don't want to do that. I want to have a long-term relationship and I want to have sex with that person. So they're a lot more able to reflect on what they want and be able to communicate that. And I'm just so excited for the future that Gen Z will build in that sense. And they talk about things like who pays on the first date, which is a huge thing. Do you ever watch First Dates on RTE?
I don't watch TV.
Oh, yeah, well, you're not missing much. But at the end of that, they're always like, who pays the bill and what does it mean? And, you're still stuck in those old gender roles of like the man pays the bill.
Can you just split the bill?
That's what most people will do. But it turns into a big argument with some of them. Okay. And then they're like, no. The woman's like, no, you pay it. And so it's kind of like, there's a lot of conversations around that. So I think it's really great that women have to take that first step and are able to reflect a lot more and have conversations about things like, what do I want? Do I want this to be a long-term relationship? Do I want kids? Do I want marriage? Do I want an open relationship, a polyamorous relationship? Do I want to be a swinger, a dogger? And it's like people are able to ask themselves those questions a lot more and then go out and get it as well. So like we've loads of open relationships in Ireland. And
by open, you mean people in a marriage or a long-term relationship, but they are allowed to go out and have sex with other people or have relationships with other people?
Yeah, usually. So polyamory.
Is that not really tricky?
It's also really exhausting. Like you kind of need like a Google spreadsheet to keep track of like when you're seeing which person and stuff.
But not like there'd be a little bit jealousy either side.
It depends though. It depends on people and stuff. Like my husband said he'd never be poly because he couldn't be bothered listening to the drama. Because if I came back and I'm like, oh, I broke up with this person, he's like, I don't want to hear it. Like I can't be. He wants a quiet life, and he's like, it's fine. But yeah, so if you have kind of relationships with people, that's generally more in the polyamorous field. If you just want to have sex with people, one night stands, that's often the open relationship kind of thing.
Okay.
But then even in that, some people are like, they have a don't ask, don't tell policy, and other people are like, guess what I did? I came back and I had sex with this person, and then they have really hot sex together talking about it, or, you know, that works for some people and that's other people's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
So it's about what works for you. And then other people are like, I don't want sex anymore, so I don't mind if you go off and have sex with someone else once it's not a relationship. So there's all these kind of
Is it not hard to have sex without having some kind of relationship or growing quite fond of someone if it's the same person on a regular basis?
Some people have that rule of like, it can only be a stranger, and others are like, well, it can be the same
3 times.
person. If you, right, that's
3
the
times
magic
and then
number.
that's it.
Yeah, you know, more, no less kind of thing.
But then the whole thing about, like, if you have sex for the first time with someone, it's usually not as good as it could be if you've had it a few times with someone. So it's like, you know, so yeah.
Like one night stand sex is often not satisfying at all, because you're both just trying to figure it out, and you're going, I have a brand new body in front of me, what do I do? And you don't have that time to learn what they like, or learn that sound means this, or, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's complicated, but.
And you said swingers. Sorry, I need to talk to you about this, because I get asked in my confession boxes all the time.
Yeah.
You know, a partner wants to swing, or they both want to swing, they don't know where to start it. Have you swung? Have you done swinging?
I haven't swung, but I just, my fun fact is...
Because you looked at your sorry, you know, if you're not watching, her face just lit up.
No, I love it, because I have like the worst story about this. Okay. So the swinging part of things, there's swinging parties going on like every weekend in Ireland, and every weekday as well, probably.
Sorry, where
as well.
now? Where?
Yeah, I'll give you a number later.
People want to know.
Yeah, but like it's either in people's houses or like special clubs that they can kind of rent, and some people are like, oh, there's Mary and Joseph, you know, like they're a regular at this, and you know, and some of them are like,
bring baby Jesus with them as well.
They might. But they're like, you know, oh, you can do a soft swing, which is like you can kind of be in the same room, but all 4 of you or whatever have to be in the same room, or otherwise they're like, no, you can go off with them, I don't mind, come back down later afterwards. But I know this couple from somewhere like Sligo or something, and they went to a swingers party in Dublin, and they were like, that's great, no one's going to know us, you know. Their neighbours were there.
But does that mean it's a really small community as well? So that the likelihood of you bumping into someone that you know is there. You know, John next door, who you see taking out the bins.
So you might be kind of, like think about it. And I do know a girl whose uncle was there, and she was kind of in a compromising position, shall we say. And she looked up and she was like, oh, hiya. And they were like, let's never mention this ever again. So like, I just love the awkwardness of that. And like that poor couple from Sligo, they were telling me about it, and they were like, our hearts dropped, and there was no way they could kind of like turn around and make a quick exit. So they were like, hello.
And what, do you pay to go to them? Or you just turn
I think
up?
A lot of them, you pay.
Okay.
If it's like more professionally organised kind of thing.
And what, you just look up swinging in Dublin or swinging in Galway?
Yeah, there's websites called like Fab Swingers.
Oh yeah, and that was the one actually.
Yeah.
Whenever I put up my confession box, does anyone, because people wanted to know, Fab Swingers come up a lot.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this interesting trend of trying out new things, or maybe we're just talking about it more. I'm sure there was swinging parties. There was always that car key exchange bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and there was something on it. Was it the Two Johnnies the other day? And they were saying that they're the Two Johnnies on, where are they on? Today FM or no, RT Radio 2. 2FM. Jesus, I got there in the end. Some reader left them a note or something, and that their whole estate apparently would swing at like confirmation time. So they'd get all the kids in one room, and then all the adults would go to another house, and they'd be like, you're all having a sleepover there, happy days. And all the adults would go over and have whatever party that they were going to have. And I think it's like a lot of swingers are like older as well, but there are younger ones kind of coming in. But that's a lot of times when people are like 50, 60 and they're like, feck it, let's try something new. And they have enough of a solid relationship to kind of make it more successful. Because if you're just doing it to keep someone else happy, guaranteed disaster. Guaranteed disaster. And guaranteed higher potential of non-consensual environments as well, because you're not really wanting to be there. So it's not really your thing.
But how do you, in a relationship, say, and this is one of the questions that come in, how do you then, if someone really wants something and you really don't want something, do you have to try and find a middle ground? Or is it just a case of you go, that is not acceptable to me, and if that's a deal breaker on your bike, like how does that work out in reality?
It's a bit of both. Like it can be a deal breaker and be like, if this is so important to you, you need to maybe go find the right person to go do that with. Or maybe it's a don't ask, don't tell thing of like, you go off and indulge that somewhere else and I just don't want anything to do with it. We have our family life together, but you can do this with someone else, whatever that happens to be. But people do a lot of that in like shame and secrecy, because you can't exactly tell your mom, oh, guess what he asked me, or, you know, he's going out on a date tonight or something like that. You know, it's hard to talk about this, but in the reality there's thousands of people doing it, you know. So yeah, it kind of really depends, but if you're doing it to keep someone happy, it's never going to work. And I was on a podcast with Beat FM in Waterford the other day, and the host Shona, her whole thing was saying she's not into anal sex. She's just like, it's never going to happen, and that's it. And he's just like, I've accepted my life will have no anal sex in it, and that's the thing. But if he's pushing and asking for it, then obviously that's going to be a different kind of conversation. So I think it just depends on what you want, you know, and you don't have to stay in a situation now like where you're unhappy. And that can be physically unhappy, or it can be that your sexual wellness is just not taken into account. You know, there's lots of people who might make it to 50 and they're like, you know what, I can't live like this anymore and I'm not me, or, you know, I want to go off and explore for myself, or, you know, at the Viva La Vulva in Cork, there's, you know, that question of I'm bi and in a relationship with my husband, what do I do? And it's like, you know, you need to decide if you want to go explore it, and what does that mean? Like, it has a cost, you know, and is it the cost of your relationship, or is it the cost of keeping yourself stuffed down forever and not being your true self? So that all looks different for everyone. Like, there is no one size fits all. It's not like Mary up the road does this, so that'll work for me, and I'm a failure if that didn't work. It's so mixed, you know. It's just, and it all depends on people's communication skills and comfort levels and ability to afford fancy nights in a hotel with your secret partner and all these kind of things. So it's not black and white, and I suppose that's the fun side of sexuality, that it is so mixed up. But I think we compare ourselves to others and we're like, oh, they're perfect, and it doesn't work.
There's no such thing as perfection. Actually, the thing about Viva La Vulva, when that confession in inverted commas came in about the person being bi and her husband not, you know, knowing and her not wanting to know, and then when you come out with, oh, I'm bi too, and there's nothing I'd like more than to see my husband have sex with another man, a real big hairy man, and I think the room just went. And I was like, I didn't expect that at all. Like, I need to plant these kind of things now into my shows. But, you know, it was so left field, Caroline, that so then I was like, what? But then you went on today to tell me that, you know, you were in.
Oh, I was in San Francisco. Yeah. And so it was when their like kind of pride event was, which is like Folsom Street Fair. It's like just gay man central. It's not really for a whole lot of different kind of people. It's generally gay men are the kind of main group of them, and they all just like get dressed up in leather and just have a street party where all sorts goes on, and it's like, okay, fine. But I went into one of their sex shops and it was like more it's definitely a gay man sex shop. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of clitoris related items in that shop, and they had like the smell of leather. When I walked in, I was like, oh yeah. And they had like hardcore gay porn and all these screens, and I was just looking around going, it's like really hot. It's really hot. And the gay men were like, you know, they're coming in out changing rooms and they were coming out like stark naked, but have this tiny little chest harness on. They'd be like, what do you think? I don't know about the colour, like, or does it sit right here? And the lads were all taking it seriously and going, yeah, no, I prefer that last one. You know, it was like they were like wedding dress shopping, you know, it was just like, this is what you wear. And then sometimes they'd like pull down their pants in the middle of the store and be like, but what about this jock strap on me? Like, what do you think? And they're like, I don't know if that'll clash with your shoes, you know, and all this.
Oh my God. And you were loving it.
I was loving it because I was like, the freedom that they had was just like, they were just living their best lives. And I was like, oh, that's so intoxicating to be in an environment where people feel so comfortable, they feel so free, they have the kind of lives they want to have. And like, gay men have it like sewn up in a lot of ways, you know, because they're kind of a lot freer to kind of have the kind of sex that they want to have, whereas women again have been judged as sluts or locked up in laundries, you know, if we wanted to explore our sex life. So it's just this lovely like liberating environment, and it's really nice to be in, even if my husband is as straight as anything and it's so annoying. I'm like, just kiss a big like lovely bear, and he's like, do you remember consent? And I'm like, just don't annoy me, just do it for me. I know. And he's like, can you please stop telling people that? No, but he's funny about it.
And now you've said it publicly on the podcast. But being a bi woman and marrying a straight man, do you miss women?
Sometimes I kind of see someone and I'm like, that's kind of, she's kind of cute, and, let's kind of say, but then, like, I think if I wanted to, my husband, again, he'd probably be like, okay, but I just don't hear any of the drama. I don't hear if you're breaking up. I don't hear if you're fighting. He's just like...
Because some men would love that. It's an opportunity for a threesome, but no interest.
Oh, no, because that's never a thing. Like, some guys are like, yeah, I can join in. You're like, no, the reason they're being bi is they want to be with each other, not with you as well. It's like a penis-free zone. That's where they want. But a lot of guys think that. Yeah, and they'll be like, that's the best way to have a threesome. It's like, not necessarily. But it might be for some people. Okay. They're like, I don't mind if you explore your bi side, but I want to be there, and can we make it a threesome? And that works for some people and doesn't work for others. So, it's about, what works for you, kind of. And luckily I got a good bit of exploring in before I met my husband, so I was kind of not a virgin in that sense, so that was kind of nice to have. But I think it's harder if you're kind of later in life and you've kind of made your life, and then you realise actually my sexuality is something I want to explore, because then you risk people getting hurt. If you're like, I really want to go explore this, and your partner's like, no, absolutely not, it's like, what gets sacrificed, so how do you deal with that? And, people have stuffed down their sexuality for so long, and it's like, it does lead to a miserable life a lot of the time, and, a shocker of things. Like, look at Philip Schofield, he came out as gay
I know.
Not that long ago, and it's like, he was married, and like, you can imagine his wife feel betrayed, and you might think, God, was our marriage a lie, all these kind of things. So there's just, it's complex, and there's a lot of human hurt, in the emotions and stuff. But then other people don't mind it as well. So, I knew someone before who, I don't know if I'd use the word transgender for him, but like dressing up in women's clothes. I don't think he would have, wanted to live as a woman. It was just the clothes part. Yeah. And what we used to say is transvestite, but we don't really use that word.
We don't use that term really anymore,
no, because I think it just got labelled, all trans people kind of came under that umbrella, but not everyone wants to do that. But he was telling me one time, and he must have been in his like 60s or something, that he'd kind of buy all the clothes and stuff and dress up when his wife was at work and everything else, but then started getting so anxious that she'd find it, so he'd burn them all. But then like guilt and shame and everything else came into it, and then he'd kind of start building it up again, enjoying the clothes, and then having to like burn them all again or donate them or something. And it's like, God, that just sounds so miserable. He's like, I'll never tell her, never come out, I'll never leave her, she will never hear about this. And it's like, God, that's just,
oh God. And you don't know how she'd react if that was, she might be just be like, yeah, okay.
She might take him shopping.
She might. And, sometimes that can lead on to a better relationship for everyone as well, because like ultimately, so long as your partner isn't hurting you and they're not doing things that you don't want them to, you want them to live their best lives too, don't you? But I suppose it can be a difficult conversation. It's not an easy conversation either,
No. And like a lot of people don't have the words for it as well. Like, and they don't know how to name their sexuality or to reassure their partner that it's not them. It's the person themselves. It's their stuff. It's not like, oh, I'm gay because my wife won't give me enough sex or something. If someone says that to you, that's really divorce time, because that's a terrible thing to say to someone else, and also not true. But it's kind of, God, people are miserable a lot of the time. But we were really bad about mental health in Ireland for a long time, and we're really bad about sexual wellness for a long time, and we still kind of are. But it's just like, they are important, your physical, your mental and your sexual wellness, one impacts the other. And it's so important to be able to live your best authentic life. But not everyone gets to do that for loads of reasons.
Yeah, and actually a couple of questions that come in, and it's interesting. People are saying like, how much sex is enough sex in a marriage? Yeah. Because my partner wants much more sex than me and makes me feel guilty for not wanting to have it. And, we have sex a couple of times a week, but he always wants more.
Yeah, I mean,
so how do you navigate that in a relationship?
That's really common. I think really, really common. And firstly, you don't have to have sex to keep someone happy. That's because it's not really consensual then, or there's a difference as well between willing and wanting. You might be like, oh, not massively in the mood, but okay, and sometimes we think, oh, that's not consent because they're not going, yeah, I really want to. Like a lot of long-term relationship sex is like, go on, the kids are out, go on with 5 minutes, go on, lash it in there, and it's like, that's not romantic or whatever, but it's realistic, a lot of the time. But yeah, so I think it's maybe about getting creative and saying, well, can you have sex in the morning or can you have sex in the evening? What times work for you? Because your partner might be coming to you every night and you're wrecked. You've just run around after the kids all day and you're like, I have no interest in having any kind of sex right now. But maybe in the morning time that might work, or an afternoon quickie if that was kind of an option. Or, just having a blatant, honest talk about it, because maybe the reason why you might not want sex as much, again, might be like a medical reason, menopause, libido.
There's so much to it.
But maybe sometimes it's like the sex isn't kind of good, so why would you want it?
Yeah.
If you ate ice cream all the time and it gave you food poisoning, you're not really going to want it the next time. So is it the case of you don't really want the sex at all, or you don't want the kind of sex that you have currently? And if that's the case, then it's like, well, how do you change that up? Do you introduce toys or different positions or, whatever the smorgasbord of sex that's kind of out there? So sometimes it's not necessarily like, I don't want sex. It's, I don't want that kind of sex. But that's scary to kind of say. So you have to say that in a way that's not going, by the way, sex at you is kind of crap and it's not satisfying.
Yeah.
That can hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah.
But it's talking around that, or even saying, sitting down. I asked Shauna before from Sex Shop, I was like, should you get a voucher for someone for, a vibrator or something? And she was like, no, sit down together and like go through the site and go, do you think that might work? Or what about this? And that kind of builds that excitement, but also that emotional intimacy. And then it leads into going, oh, well, if we got this, maybe we could try this position. And then it leads you to talk about other things as well.
Okay.
So that emotional intimacy is really important for your physical intimacy too. But if it comes to it and someone's like, yeah, I want sex like 20 times a week, and if you're not giving it to me, you're bad, or they make you feel guilty, that's not okay, because that's sexual coercion as well of, you're not responsible to meet someone else's sex needs, and they're not entitled to have them met either. They're not going, but I have a really high sex drive, so you have to do something about that. Like, that's their problem. That's not your problem. You're not there to service them, so sex is mutual.
But isn't it seen? Do you remember a woman's duty was to have sex with her husband?
That's what it was. Yeah. It's like you obey them. And that's why people had 15 babies, because they didn't have a choice in a lot of some of those times. But now we don't have to do that. And we can sit there and go, I'm not interested in sex. And that might lead to something else, a conversation about, well, what's the future like? It's not an excuse for cheating. It's not like, oh, my wife doesn't understand me, or my wife doesn't give me sex. Like, you're not entitled to get given sex, even the language of that.
Yeah.
Give you sex, it's just no. So I think, is it a comfortable position, or is that one that you say yes because you're afraid to say no? And why are you afraid to say no? And kind of exploring those awkward reasons are kind of really important as well, because you shouldn't be in that situation where you're like, God, have I got another 20 years of this to deal with? That's not living your best life.
But then a lot of women would say as well as I don't feel like it. But then when I got into it, actually it was quite enjoyable.
Yes. So that's responsive desire.
Okay.
And so if that works for you, then you got to figure that out. So, because some people might say, well, that's not consensual.
So you keep saying figure that out, right? You got to figure it out. Yeah. People just want to be told what to do, Caroline, okay?
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Okay. It's like you going, okay, take these supplements and that's it. And it's like, no, there's more of a conversation to it than that,
Take them regularly, daily.
And you're like, what does that mean? And what does it, and you got to talk about what meds you're on as well, and impacts and all that kind of thing. So people want an easy answer.
Yeah.
but it's not happening for a lot of people. So when we say sex is work, like it is, like you have to talk about it and figure out what works for you. So if responsibility or responsive desire is your thing, then have that chat and go, oh, I don't really like it, but if you start touching my neck, oh, then I might kind of be in the mood a little bit.
Okay.
And so that is consensual then, and maybe that's just the dynamic that you have. But that can be frustrating for the other person if they feel like I'm always the initiator, you know, and they're never really in the mood, but then I kind of work my magic and then they are in the mood. That can lead to
them feeling,
like,
you know, not listened to. Okay. So, so then if you're never the initiator, like people are saying, do you need to like almost become the initiator?
You could give it a shot.
Okay.
You know, and see if it works for you. And if it's something you're not comfortable with, you got to talk about that. Because you might initiate things and then they're like, deadly, this is where it's going to be forevermore now. And you're like, didn't really work. You have to talk about it. If you're close enough that you can put their genitals in your mouth or do whatever you're doing with them, then we should be able to talk as well.
It's so funny, isn't it? You're so intimate with someone, but then you can't actually use the words to talk about it.
Yeah, and you've done some like nasty stuff with them, and you're just going, God, I can't speak about it.
It's like this. Have you seen that meme going around? It's actually so funny. It's like you wouldn't share your water bottle with your friend, and then it's like you 30 minutes into your first date, and it's like a guy like eating your bum or like, something.
Yeah, like people are nasty.
That's so funny, isn't it? Like how you know you're like, oh no, I wouldn't do that, but then you're doing this.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you before I wrap up with you about men and dating apps these days and the expectations that they might have and the expectations women have and how they're not really aligned.
They're not aligned sometimes. There's a researcher called Nicola Fox Hamilton, and she looked at men who send unsolicited dick pics, and she's like, some of them sent it because they were like, but we're going to be dating, so I might as well show them what I got. So I don't see what the issue is.
Holy Mother of Jesus. I'm telling you now, I think there is very few women out there that actually want to get a dick pic, particularly an unsolicited one.
Like, if you want them, knock yourself out, happy days. But opening a conversation like, hello, here's my penis.
I worked with a woman, right, who went, and she was in she was middle-aged, and she was talking with some guy on a dating app, and he seemed like a very nice man, she said, and they swapped pictures, and they were going to meet in a cafe on a Sunday morning, you know, at 11 o'clock, and he said to her via the dating app, look, can we just exchange numbers just so, like, just in case, you know, I don't see you, or like there's something that comes up that I can give you a ring. She's like, yeah, sure. And she sent him her number, right? Yeah. Within a second, a dick pic came back. And like, she was like what? Yeah. On God's earth.
And see, that's someone who knows, because if he had sent it on the dating app, he'd get reported and banned from it. And especially on Bumble, it's like zero tolerance for that. You are off, like, if that's what you're doing. So someone who knows. So that's really interesting that like he's finding ways to get his kicks out of this, you know, and it's just like, he can't be that clueless. You can't, like, it's 2024.
Well, I was talking to a man about that, right? And the man's theory on that was, you know, he probably does that to 50 women and one of them will respond well. And he's like, okay, she's the one then. So he probably like does it all the time. And so he's like just testing them all. And the one that like sends a laughy face back or accepts, you know, that as part of the conversation back is the one that, you know, obviously will be up for whatever he wants. So there's that too.
Yeah, which is not grounded in reality either. No. Like, it's just, and like most women were like, just, you know, the response, I think Nicola was saying, most women were like, no, we don't like it. Like pretty unanimously, which is no surprise to anyone. So you're just going, what are you doing? And some of them enjoy the sexual violence of it, because it is, again, it's sexual violence. You didn't consent to seeing someone's
I
bits.
never thought of that.
Yeah, it is. And so some people...
It's like someone flashing you down the road and you're not expecting it, and the shock of it. You do feel violated. I was flashed at once as a kid, and I remember just like it was awful.
Yeah, and so it's just the online version of it. So predators will find whatever technology that will enable them. You know, you can abuse someone through Facebook, you know, and it doesn't mean everyone's an abuser on Facebook, but an abuser wants to send you an unsolicited dick pic, they'll find whatever way they can to do it. And it is about power and control and enjoying the fact that they know that that woman would be upset afterwards. So there is that population. And then according to Nicola's survey, there were the ones who were clueless about it and didn't know that women didn't like it, which I struggle with, and she struggled with, and was like,
how can they think? Are they so removed from?
I just don't know what planet you're living on that you're just like, yeah, women want to see my junk, like, without consent or without speaking to, or even like without hooking up with them. And even then,
saying hello or like having a kiss or anything, like, yeah,
you're just like, and they were like, well, that's what we're here for, dating, like. So they're, but again, that's that pressure on men to be like, you got to have the big penis and you got to be good at sex. You got to initiate. You got to be a legend. And if you don't do all these things, like, you're like a wuss or like you're a pussy if you're not doing this like toxic masculinity kind of stuff. And like, it is hard on guys as well.
It is. And they've Andrew Tate to look up to and be told, like,
God,
you know.
The man, Jesus. Like, yeah. And it's all.
I think he's done a lot of damage to younger boys.
Yes.
Like, you hear young boys, like 10-year-olds talking about Tate the top G, like.
I know, God. And it's just like, his stuff is just how you manipulate people.
Yeah.
And if you have to learn how to manipulate people into sex, like, that's gross. It's so gross. But it kind of says, well, why are boys so vulnerable? Why? It's not women who are buying into this. There isn't a lot of like female influencers who are like, ladies, this is how you make your man feel so bad that he will want to have sex with you. But there's plenty of male influencers who are doing that. And that's really problematic. And the fact that, you know, he has multiple rape charges against him and sex trafficking charges and has been openly admitted that he traffics women into sex work unconsensually. Like, admits that. And that's part of his thing. And you're going, what's going on that's, you know.
But he's talking to men that they can't get a girlfriend, they don't feel seen, they might be on dating apps and they might be small, so they don't get the dates because we all know that women want tall men, you know, most of the time. So it's tough for them too. And I do, like, I'm a mother of 3 boys, so I feel it for the boys too.
Yeah, I did a relationship green flag activity with someone before, so that it's, you know, we get post-its and we like, write down your green flags on this, and people come over and they talk about it, and it's a great way for people to talk about healthy relationships. And loads of the guys this time, like, they were, I think, transition year students or something, they wrote has to be 6 foot on the thing, and I was like, let's talk about that. Why is that not necessarily
a green flag?
A green flag.
That means a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So other people were putting down like, listens to their mum or talks respectfully about their mum or picks me up when I'm, you know, when it's raining, or, you know, nice, healthy, normal relationship things. And the lads were putting down has to be 6 foot. Aww. And I was like, now, where are you getting that from? And he's like, that's what girls want. And it's like, but what about girls who want you to, like, you know, help them out with their homework or, you know, cook for you after an exam or something? And they were like, no, you have to be 6 foot. I was like, oh, that's like really problematic.
Because that's like a girl needing to be size 10.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like you can't control it. And I've seen plenty of messages on Reddit from women who were like, oh no, you're only like 5'11", like, you know, that's gross. And it's like, Jesus, like,
yeah, so women can be as nasty.
Totally.
Yeah. And I've male friends and they said, like, it's a, you know, and I know that men and their expectations and probably wanting younger women as well, because you know, you always hear about there's a 50-year-old man but he won't see a woman in her 40s, he wants a 30-year-old, you know, that type of way, or a woman in her late 30s. But I do think that sometimes women's expectations are very high too, and you know, we kind of need to take a long hard look at ourselves as to what do we actually want in life.
I think the pandemic changed some of that for us, because a lot of people realised, oh yeah, my partner might be great looking, but I'm locked in with them in lockdown and they're annoying the life out of me, or they don't put the bins out, or they don't solve an argument, but they look really hot, but they're also like just not funny or something like that. And I think, you know, actually that was from some Bumble research, actually, that women and men really started prioritising emotional intimacy and emotional maturity. And we're liking people like Harry Styles or Pedro Pascal, or, you know, people who are known for being kind and in touch with themselves and comfortable, rather than the Andrew Tates of the world. So I think that's really nice. And that's what a lot of women want. Like, if you look at people like Andrew Tate, it's not women who are lusting after him, it's the men. Because they're like, that's what we want. But also, you know, in Ireland, we're blessed. We have like the Shona Project, which helps young teenage girls be their best self and look after each other and you know, find strength in community. There's not a lot of that for guys, you know, and it's like, where's the male Shona version?
Oh yeah, I never
you know,
thought of
so
that.
if we have that, and then so you have people like Tay filling in that vacuum then, you know, and girls will often talk to their friends a bit more as well. And you know, and guys are just kind of left to themselves.
Boys do need that good male role model in their lives. As in, it doesn't have to be their dad. No. It could be their granddad or their uncle, or it could be like a GA coach or something.
Yeah.
But they need someone they can almost like look up to and relate to as a man, don't they?
Absolutely. And I spoke to some rugby players before, and I was like, well, who do you want to be? Like, and what kind of role model do you want to be? And like, we were talking about Marcus Rashford, the football player, and he spent all his money on like food banks and stuff, and, you know, was helping people in poverty, and is like, that's really great. And that's who your role model could be, rather than someone who's like, oh, I spent 10 grand on a watch, you know, or I'm fucking all these bitches and hoes, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to see, but you know, I don't know a lot of male sex educators, and the ones I kind of know are probably gay as well. There's not a lot of like straight male sex educators. And
why is that?
I don't know. It's just really sad. Like, I know so many, there's women and trans people and non-binary people crawling out of the woodwork being sex educators, but straight men, it's just not there as much. And I wish they would. I wish there was someone sitting down with guys and being like, look, like, this is how you can masturbate safely, or this is like how you can have satisfying sex that isn't
how do you
just
masturbate unsafely?
Sex. Oh, by like tugging yourself raw, or like, you know, using items that are not made for that. Like, women have masturbated with like things like carrots and stuff, and you're like, there's germs on that. It'll upset your pH balance. Do not.
And the little hairs that are on them too, you can get stuck up there. Oh my goodness, I'm having carrots for dinner tonight.
That's what you're going to be thinking.
Oh my
now.
goodness.
So yeah, so things like that, or, you know, if you have like a death grip, you know, like that guys are like, they're masturbating so hard that like no one can live up to that. So then they're going, well, they can't get enough the same kind of sensation, you know, or else they're watching porn as their only form of sex ed. So then when it becomes real life, they're kind of confused. Like, I remember there's this book I read, can't remember it now, Life Me, something called Dilemmas of Desire, I think. But it was this woman interviewing young Canadian men, I think they were, and they were like, you know, teenagers. And one guy said the way he lost his virginity was he was having sex with this girl, and then he pulled out and came on her face. Oh. And she was like, yeah, the same reaction. She was like, what are you doing? And he was like, that's what you do. And he genuinely did not know why she was freaking out. She's like, that's what you do. And then he didn't have sex again for like 6 years or something, because he was so freaked out, so guilty feeling over it. And God knows what she was going through as well.
So the two of them are actually victims of the fucking porn that your man's watching and the lack of sex education.
Yeah, both. Like, I think it's crucial to have both, because, you know, he was like, if I had known that, I would never have done it. And he had so much shame, and he was like, God, that poor girl, and, you know, everything else. And like, he wasn't doing it to be malicious. He was just like, that's what you do. And he had like, you know, and he'd said he had no sex ed, and, you know, his parents didn't talk to him and stuff. And it's like, that's not what we want. We want young men to be just as happy with sex as we want every other gender, you know. And another woman called Cindy Gallup, who has a website called Make Love Not Porn, and it features like real couples having sex, and, you know, there's probably like the laundry basket in the corner kind of thing, and like the cat will probably walk in halfway,
wash machine on,
like regular normal kind of everyday kind of stuff. And she, I forget how old she is. She's something like in her 50s or something. And she says like, oh, she dates younger men. She likes 20-year-olds and whatever else it is. And she said she got to a point where she was sleeping with them, and she was just being flipped over into these positions. And it was like, you know, very kind of porn sex. It was like, you have to do 50 positions in one night and stuff. And she's like, what is going on? And then she talked to them, and it's like, they're all like, that's what you do. That's because that's what they saw on porn. So they were like, well, that's how you're good at sex. You got to do all these positions and you got to flip them around. And she was like, this is terrible sex. But they were like, oh, I'm great in bed.
That's just reinforcing the conversation that we had earlier, which is about you need to be talking to your kids about the fact that that's, you know,
absolutely.
But like, You know, you don't sit down and watch it with them and say, oh, no, you don't do that, you don't do that. But you can say how it lovingly happens, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Caroline, I could talk to you for ages. We need to wrap it up because you have to go and see a film that's been...
do.
What is that film about? It's by the Rape Crisis Centre.
It's Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. They have a screening. I think it's called How to Be Good at Sex or How to Have Sex. And it's a fundraising event because the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre does still not have enough funding from the government. So they're doing all these things. So yeah, it's a way to kind of have different conversations about sex. And I think film is a great way to do it, you know, and it's, you don't have to talk about sex sometimes. Sometimes you can just watch depictions on screen.
And is it going to be rolled out to all cinemas or?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. But I'd like to see if I could bring it down to Cork or something like that afterwards. So yeah, we'll see. So it could be good. I think there's possibly depictions of sexual violence in it.
Okay.
So it's just, again, it's a learning tool for many people and stuff. So
and is it only the one night it's showing or
just tonight? Yeah. But I hopefully, if you follow, they have their Dublin Rape Crisis Instagram, they also have We Consent. I think there's a hyphen in between them, and they share consent related material, and they also run consent workshops as well if you want to take them to feel comfortable in yourself before you talk to your kids as well. So, you know, because we have all our own baggage as well, you know, before talking to kids.
So true, isn't it?
Totally.
Okay, Caroline, I'm gonna ask you my 2 favourite questions now to wrap this up.
Okay.
So what advice would you give young people today?
Oh, it's so hard to squish it all in. Okay, so that your physical, mental and sexual wellness is all important. You don't have to do what your peers are doing just because they're doing it. It does get better if you're going through a hard time, if you're experiencing bullying or something at home. There is help out there, and there are good adults that can help support you. And it does get better as you go through life, and you get to, you know, surround yourself with good people and good experiences and good things. There's so much great sex education out there. So if you want to, quote, be good in bed, you know, there are great ways out there that you can do that. And really being good in bed is listening to each other and checking in, asking what consent is. And once you have that, you're kind of golden for a lot of it. But yeah, I think it's, you know, I think young people today will really save the world in a lot of ways. They're very switched on. They're very inclusive of lots of people. And I think it's great that they're finding themselves a lot more, you know, and they're able to be themselves. So I think that's great. So keep doing that. And authenticity is just such an attractive feature. But it takes a while to get to that point where you can be authentic. So it does get better, and there's help out there if you need it, regardless of if you need it now or if you need it when you're 50. You know, there's always someone out there to listen and support. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is the meaning of life?
The meaning of life is probably to figure out the meaning of life. I think it's a big one. I think maybe just the meaning of life is to figure out how we can leave a better world behind us than the one that we found. And that's the meaning of life, to see how we can all work together to make life a bit easier for everyone else. I think. Yeah.
I think so too. Caroline, Dr. Caroline West, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I will see you at Viva la Vulva on May 5th.
I'm so excited. I'm planning my outfit, my wardrobe and everything, and I can't wait.
I was in the National Concert Hall today running through because it's different, you know, like the stage is massive, it's a big auditorium, so it's going to be wild. Listen, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.